Welcome to Buddhism Seeds, a place where ancient Zen stories are gently brought back to life, light as a passing breeze, deep as an underground stream, to lull you into restful sleep after a long day of carrying the weight of modern life. Perhaps you've been like so many of us, racing from one appointment to another, drowning under the relentless pressures of work, money, and responsibilities. Your mind spins like a wheel that never stops. Your body is exhausted, yet your heart can't rest. You try to fall asleep, but the thoughts you haven't let go of quietly crawl back, pulling you once more into the whirlpool of worry. And then in that very moment, when it seems impossible to be still, these ancient Zen stories appear like tiny lanterns illuminating a different path, the path of stillness. They don't shout theories, don't demand change. They are simple tales, yet hold the profound wisdom of the Buddha's teachings, each word like a drop of cool water soaking into a parched soul. Let these 3 hours of Zen storytelling become your pause. A quiet place where you don't need to prove anything, don't need to compete or win, where you can simply release each breath. Let go of the tension clinging to you all day, and just listen. Because sometimes what we need most isn't to push harder, but to truly rest. To return inward to the place where the mind is still like a moonlit lake. And now, as your mind begins to settle, I invite you to step into the first story. That morning, the sky seemed not yet awake. Thick mist blanketed the mountain slopes, covering the winding trail through the ancient forest like a cold, wet ribbon. Tiny droplets clung heavily to the leaves, falling onto the soft earth with faint sighs. A cold wind slid through the rocks, carrying the raw scent of wet leaves and damp soil, mingling with a faint trace of incense from a distant temple, where the temple bell echoed through the valley like a call from another world, soft yet unwavering. Along that road walked a young monk. His brown robe was frayed at the shoulders, faded with time, swaying lightly in the wind. He held an old bamboo staff, his steps slow but steady like the ticking of time. His face was calm, his gaze set on the small village hidden behind the mountains where he went each week to beg for alms. That day was darker than usual. Gray clouds thickened atop the peaks like heavy dust. The light was dim and blurred hard to tell day from dusk. The trail was slick and cold, twisting like a coiled serpent. Yet the monk walked on silently, as though nothing could shift his steps from the path he knew so well. Then around a bend, he stopped. Beside the road, among grass flattened by the wind, lay a curled-up figure. At first, he thought it was just a pile of discarded cloth, but then he saw a hand, pale, thin, smeared with mud, trembling like a dry twig in the wind. A face appeared gaunt and colorless, cracked lips, breath so faint it seemed a passing breeze could erase it. The man's cloudy eyes, dim like dying lamps, strained to look at the monk. His lips moved, but no sound came. A frail arm lifted halfway, then dropped back down powerless. The monk stood still. For a moment, time seemed to stop around him. Only the soft beating of his heart and the distant howl of wind through the mountains remained. Before him lay 2 roads. One to keep walking to reach the village before nightfall, avoiding being stranded in the mountains at dark. 2 to stop and lift this dying man, knowing it could cost him his own safety. In just a few breaths, he chose. No words, no hesitation. The monk knelt. With thin yet steady arms, he gently lifted the man onto his back. The man was weightless, like skin over bones, yet heavy as stone from limp surrender. As the sudden weight pressed down the monk's back, bent instinctively, his bamboo staff fell rolling into the wet grass. The wind howled louder. Dense gray clouds crawled across the peaks, blotting out the light. He walked. Each step sank into slippery mud. The path narrowed, climbed, twisted like it resisted him. On his back, the man wheezed, each ragged breath flickering like a candle in the wind. The monk's robe clung drenched to his back, not just from the mist, but from bitter sweat. His arms went numb, muscles strung tight as overpulled cords, knees trembling as if ready to snap. But he did not stop. He did not think about collapsing. He did not think about wild animals lurking in the dark, closing in from the ridges. He did not think about who might help him if he fell. He thought only of one thing, the fragile breath quivering on his shoulders. A breath, weak yet clinging to life like a seed, wedged in stone, begging for a sheltering hand. Time crawled absurdly slow. Night slid down from the peaks, creeping over cliff faces, swallowing the damp forest piece by piece. The wind sound shifted, no longer rustling, but shrieking like an unseen beast stalking them. The monk's soles burned. Mud clung to each step, like invisible hands trying to pull him back. Still, he walked, bent low teeth clenched, breathing hard. Each step swayed his body, yet his gaze did not waver, fixed ahead, where he knew, though unseen, a village waited. Up and down the slopes, across slick, mossy stone bridges, through misty bends that seemed to lead into another world. He walked as if nothing existed but the duty to carry this life out of the closing darkness. When the village finally appeared at the mountain's foot, lamplight flickering from low rooftops, the monk was nearly spent. His feet were numb, shoulders aflame. He bent forward, but held tight to the faintly breathing man, never letting him slip even for a moment. Crossing the wooden bridge into the village, villagers by their fires ran toward him. They rushed to lift the man, shouting for water, calling the nurse, spreading blankets, stoking the fire. The man survived. The monk did not stay. He waited for no thanks, accepted no praise. He simply nodded, then turned back quietly, walking again into the dark mountain road, where night lay heavy as a thick cloth. His back still hunched from exhaustion, but his steps were strangely light, as if the burden he had laid down was not just a body, but a weight inside his own heart. Far off the temple, bell tolled again, ringing long across the valley, and in the dense night, his figure grew smaller, like a faint yet steady spark, climbing the winding mountain trail, until it disappeared. But something stayed behind in the hearts of those who had seen it, something very small, but very warm. This seemingly simple story is one of the deepest lessons on compassion, a quiet power that can break through even the coldest walls of the human heart. Why, in a world full of calculation, do some still choose to stop and help, expecting nothing? Why do some give their time, strength, even safety, just to save a stranger, while most of us are still struggling, just to survive ourselves? The Buddha once said, "Compassion does not wait for conditions. If you wait for the right conditions to love, it is no longer compassion." The monk understood this. He didn't wait to be strong to help. He helped while his legs trembled, while his breath raced, while his body was near collapse. He helped while the path ahead was lost in storm and mist, with no promise he wouldn't fall. because he knew compassion is not about waiting for ease, but about not turning away when someone needs you. In modern life, people set too many conditions on their kindness. I'll help when I'm free. I'll give when I have extra. I'll care when I'm strong enough. But if we wait for everything to be perfect before we love, kindness may never begin. Life rarely hands us the perfect moment to do what's right. Neuroscientists have found something fascinating. When people perform altruistic acts, their brains release oxytocin and endorphins, happiness hormones that lower stress, increase pain tolerance, boost immunity, and calm the nervous system. In other words, helping others doesn't make us weaker, it makes us stronger. Compassion doesn't drain us. It steadies the heart and clears the mind. That monk had nothing but a frail body and calloused feet, yet compassion made him the strongest one on that frozen mountain. He didn't save with muscle, but with a vow not to let that fading life go out. And that vow carried his feet through paths where reason might have quit. Many today live as if carrying the world on their backs, working themselves to exhaustion, fighting to not fall behind. And when someone needs help, they sigh, "I'm suffering too. I can't carry more." Yet the paradox is, the more we cling to everything for ourselves, the more drained we become. But when we share the load, it becomes lighter. Like someone carrying a heavy sack, they may soon collapse if alone. But if another lifts the other end, both can go farther together. Compassion is not carrying all of another's pain. It is offering a hand, even just for a while. No one must be a hero or save the whole world. Just not turn away from a life trembling on the roadside. Sometimes life feels too heavy to care for anyone else. But even a held hand, a gentle glance, a small "Are you okay?" can be the reason someone doesn't give up today. Compassion isn't found in grand gestures. It's found in pausing long enough to notice someone needs you. The monk did not save everyone. He saved one. But to that one, he was the whole world. In the rush of modern life, people have lost the ability to stop and look around. They keep running, climbing, competing until they can't see those collapsing beside them. Sometimes compassion is not doing more, but running less, rushing less to notice a faltering breath, softening enough to hear a faint cry for help. Many fear that compassion means being used, being weak. But compassion is not weakness. Compassion is courage. Courage to stop in the race and lift someone. Courage to go slower today so no one is left behind. And the strange thing is, those who pause are the ones who go farthest. Psychologists once ran a simple experiment. They split participants into two groups. One group did small daily acts of kindness. The other did nothing special. After a week, the kindness group wasn't just happier, they were less tired and stressed. Science has proven what the Buddha said thousands of years ago. When you lift others, you also lift yourself. Modern life teaches people to succeed, to climb, to win, but it rarely teaches them to be kind. And without compassion, every success is just a lonely peak, where you stand alone, cold and isolated with no warmth beside you. But with compassion, every step is walked together, every achievement holds shared joy. Not because we need praise, but because with compassion, the heart is no longer alone. That monk did not only carry a sick man, he carried humanity itself and kept it from falling in the frozen wild. And that is what made him strong, not muscle, not willpower, but that he chose to love first and face hardship later. Because when the heart leads, the feet will always find the way. The village nestled against the hillside, like a small, peaceful ink mark in the green valley. In the late afternoons, when the sun was about to slip behind the distant mountains, the thatched roofs in the village glowed a dusky gold, as if coated with the last honey of the day. From the old straw roof's kitchen, smoke rose in delicate strips, light as threads stretched across the sky, growing darker. In that village, at the end of a small winding dirt road leading to the edge of the forest, there was a simple thatched house. Its 4 woven bamboo walls had faded with time, and the wooden door creaked whenever the wind blew. In front of the porch was a gourd trellis, thick with green leaves and tiny yellow flowers that drifted down onto the brown earth whenever the wind passed, like stars falling from the sky. In that house lived a mother and her young son. They were poor, so poor that all year they had only a few worn items: a wooden table with peeling paint, 2 chipped porcelain bowls, and a cast iron pot blackened by smoke. But every evening, when the light tilted into a deep red, the mother still lit the stove. The fire crackled softly. The smoke was pungent, and the fragrance of freshly cooked rice mingled with the damp grass in the yard, creating a very particular scent, the scent of poverty, but peaceful. Their meals were always very simple, usually just a bowl of white rice, a few boiled greens. Occasionally, there would be some sesame salt or a few pieces of hot steaming sweet potato. But whenever she set the meal out, the mother always filled the boy's bowl the fullest. As for herself, she scraped the dry, crispy rice stuck to the bottom of the pot, carefully lifting it so it wouldn't break, then poured water over it to fill her bowl. The boy ate happily and carelessly, chewing noisily, his eyes sparkling with joy as if he were having a feast. He had no idea that his mother always ate very slowly, in very small bites, not because she liked to linger, but to stretch the feeling of having eaten at all. Some nights when he was fast asleep, the mother sat by the small oil lamp, her stomach growling in waves, her eyes fixed on the earthen wall. She chewed a dry grain of rice left at the bottom of the rice jar, swallowing it like swallowing a silent prayer. As long as my child is full enough to run and play tomorrow. Her gaze, whenever she watched him eat, was gentle and warm, but so quiet, it seemed as if her only sense of fullness was seeing her child's belly full. Then that winter came harsher than any year. Drizzle fell for a week. Straight, thick fog covered the paths, and the northeast wind lashed the bamboo walls until they shook. It was the season when the fields ran dry, and the rice jar in the house emptied like an hourglass, forever running backward. During those days, the child still skipped around the yard, innocently catching droplets falling from the straw roof in his palms, giggling. But the mother grew visibly thinner. At each meal, she still heaped his bowl full, while for herself, she only ladled thin rice water. Her slender hands scooped each spoonful of rice as if scooping the very last of her strength over to the child's side. There were nights when, after the boy had fallen asleep, she lay facing the wall, one hand on her flat, hollow belly, eyes wide open in the dark. Waves of hunger rose layer upon layer, pounding against the walls of her stomach, sharp with pain. But she did not cry. She only gently brushed the sweat-sticky hair from her little boy's forehead and smiled very faintly, a smile that could only come from someone who is hungry yet still wants her child to be full. She quietly went hungry for 3 days, saving the last of the rice for her son. Many years later, when the child had grown and left the small village, he finally learned the truth. On a visit home, while talking with an elderly neighbor, he heard, "Back then your mother didn't eat for 3 days. She said she wasn't hungry, but she had given you all the last rice." At that moment, it felt as if a hand squeezed his chest tight. Memories flooded back the meager meals, his mother's gentle eyes watching him eat. The time she said, "I'm full," even though the bowl before her was only rice water. He understood that while he was skipping around the yard, thinking the world was kind to him, his mother had silently borne all the hunger, the long nights, the trembling to shield his childhood from wind and cold. The mother said nothing, claimed no credit, asked for no repayment. She simply went hungry and smiled when she saw her child still had the strength to run, to laugh, to live. There are forms of love that need no words, no fanfare, no ornament. The mother's love that year was exactly that, quiet, as a thin thread of smoke each evening, fragile, yet steadfast as it threaded through a season of hunger, holding warmth for a child to keep walking forward in life. And perhaps those simple white grains of rice she gave up were the first bricks that built the strength of a person later on. There have been countless such stories, mothers quietly placing their child's life above their own. They move silently, steadily, without applause, without needing thanks. Seeing their child full and growing is already enough. And the question that lingers somewhere in the mind is what allows a person to endure hunger, fatigue, hardship, and loss in every way, just so a child can have one more bowl of white rice. The answer is simple, and also the most sacred true. Love does not need to show itself off. True love is not loud, does not need vows, does not need display, does not need witnesses or approval. It is made of quiet acts, without embellishment, without stage lights, steady like an underground stream running beneath dry earth, unseen yet day and night, nourishing an entire green forest. In today's world where social media is flooded with sweet words and sparkling images, people easily forget true love is not found in what is displayed, but in what no one sees. The mother in this story did not photograph her meager meals to post anywhere. She did not tell anyone she was starving herself. It is precisely that quietness that made her love so great, because true love does not need to be acknowledged. It only needs to be given. Scientists once conducted a very interesting study. When a mother cares for her child, the brain releases a hormone called oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Oxytocin can reduce stress, soothe emotions, and even lessen sensations of hunger and pain. That means when a mother gives her portion of rice to her child, she is not only feeding the child with food, but also feeding her own heart with love. It is that love that helps her overcome hunger, fatigue, and even fear things others might not be able to bear. Science has confirmed what the Buddha taught thousands of years ago. Selfless love can help a person rise above the instinct for self-preservation. Such love does not wait for abundance, does not wait for convenience, does not require conditions. It only requires a heart that cannot turn away. Many people in modern life toil endlessly to prove themselves, to be recognized, to claim a place at the top. But those things have never brought true peace. Meanwhile, those who quietly sacrifice for others, like the mother in this story, carry a very different kind of strength. Not loud, not showy, but steady, like an ancient tree standing through a storm. Have you noticed? The mother is often the quietest person in the family, yet she is the one everyone returns to when they are weary. Because quiet love has a special power. It makes others feel safe, even when no words are spoken. We tend to think that building a future requires money, fame, and status. But the truth is, every solid future is built on quiet sacrifices. A child grows up healthy, not only because there is food and clothing, but because someone once quietly went hungry to save the last bowl of rice for them. An adult stands firm in life, not only because of talent, but because there was once a shoulder that silently bore the hardships of their early years. If someone has ever quietly given you the best portion, never think it was your due. Behind every bowl of rice you ate, there may have been an empty stomach that silently endured. Once a young person said, "I love my mother, but I don't know how to say it." Affection doesn't always need to be spoken. What matters is not to be indifferent. Don't wait until the one who loved you is gone to feel regret. Don't wait until you've succeeded to come back and repay. Don't wait for a grand gift to show your heart. Sometimes a hug, a held hand, a simple "please eat, Mom," is enough to warm the one who once went hungry for you. In modern life, many chase distant goals so much that they forget to look back at those who gently nudged them forward whenever they almost fell. The mother in this story needs no honor, no stage. But without her, that child would never have had the strength to stand firm and run toward the future. Have you ever paused in the rush of life to think of those who once gave you the best share? If so, be grateful. Gratitude doesn't slow you down. It helps you step forward more firmly. Psychologists call this foundational emotional memory. Quiet acts of love in childhood, however small, are etched deeply into the subconscious and create a lifelong inner sense of safety. A child whose mother once gave them the last bowl of rice will grow up believing they are worthy of love. That belief becomes the foundation for every success thereafter. The mother in the story did nothing grand. She simply gave up her portion of rice. But that small act raised a human being, and the question still echoes softly. Amid today's hurried life, how often do we dare to quietly give someone our best share without anyone knowing? Because true love does not need recognition, but it always needs to be given. Do not wait to be wealthy to love. Love does not wait for conditions. Like the mother in the story, she loved while she was still hungry. She gave when there was nothing left to keep for herself. And that is what made her love great. If today you're moving through a noisy world where everyone fights for the larger portion, remember there was once someone willing to take the least so you could have more. That person may never have said "I love you," but once quietly went hungry so you could be full. Because true love does not need to be shown off. And gratitude is how we refuse to be indifferent to those who loved us like that. When you understand this, you realize to love is not to hold on, but to quietly place another above yourself, just as that mother once did. And then you will begin to do the same for the ones you love. That morning, the sea was so calm it seemed to be asleep. The surface was flat, stretching endlessly, reflecting the milky dawn sky like a giant mirror. The sun still hid behind the far horizon, revealing only its first threads of light, pale gold, like diluted honey spreading shimmering streaks over tiny ripples. The sea breeze hadn't fully awakened either. It blew lightly salty, carrying the rich scent of salt and a faint tang blending with the smell of damp sand, still bearing the traces of last night's tide. Along the long beach, the fishermen's footprints were still imprinted, big, deep dents winding like blurred paths, cutting across the pale golden sand. Scattered among them were countless small fish, silvery and glinting, washed ashore through the night and left stranded when the tide receded. They lay everywhere like shards of broken mirrors in the early light. Some still flicked their tails, weakly silver scales flashing round eyes, wet and startled, as if they couldn't understand what had just happened. Some lay motionless, mouths still slightly open as if trying to gulp one last breath. Each light gust lifted sand to dust, a thin layer over those tiny bodies, making it even harder for them to move. The waves whispered against the shore like a lullaby, but a last lullaby if no one came in time. In the midst of that vast beach, a child was walking, so small that it seemed swallowed by the wide scene. A worn, pale blue t-shirt fluttered in the wind hair, a little tousled with the night breeze still clinging bare feet, pressing tiny prints into the sand. As the child passed by, it suddenly stopped. Wide, round black eyes opened even wider. In front of it was a small fish twitching faintly, its silver scales catching the light like a fallen fragment of moon. Its tiny mouth gaped, gulping air in desperation. The child looked around. The beach stretched on forever. Thousands, tens of thousands of little fish lay scattered everywhere like a rain of broken stars fallen to earth. It squatted down and cupped both hands. Gently, it picked up the fish, holding it so softly, as if afraid of tearing the thin, trembling skin in its palms. Then, without a word, it ran toward the sea. Its little feet squished on the wet sand, leaving a trail of clumsy yet determined footprints. At the water's edge, it bent down and released the fish into the clear green water, lapping softly. The fish flicked its tail, its body flashing silver in the early light, then vanished among the tiny waves as if it had never been there. The child stood watching, lips curving into a smile so light it passed like a ray of sun gliding over the sea. It turned back, walked toward the sand, bent to pick up another, then another, and another. So it went, those small hands lifting and lowering without cease, gathering the little struggling lives from the hot sand, running to the sea to release them, then turning back again. A man standing nearby, a fisherman just returned from an early trip, stacking his nets, noticed. He stood still, squinting at the tiny footsteps darting back and forth between sea and shore, each time carrying only one small life in those tiny hands. At last, he sighed, shook his head and called out, "Hey kid, there are thousands of fish here. You can't save them all." The child didn't stop. Still bent over it, picked up another small fish, palms full of wet sand scales sparkling like bits of scattered stars. It looked up, black eyes gleaming as if reflecting the brightening sky, and answered softly but clearly, "But for this one, I've made a difference." Then it turned and ran toward the water again, little feet stamping tiny prints in the sand, glittering in the sun like star marks, stringing into a miniature Milky Way across the golden earth. The man stood silent. The waves beat steadily, like the sea's distant heartbeat. He watched the small footprints fade into the water's edge, where the child bent again to return another small life to the ocean. And as a gentle wave carried the fish away, and with it, the child's footprints, something rose in the man's chest that was hard to name, tender and aching, because he understood. Some things seem so small as to be meaningless, and yet are enough to change a destiny. And sometimes the world doesn't need hands big enough to hold everything. It just needs a small hand willing to bend down and begin. That story ends lightly, short, simple, yet like an arrow straight to the heart. Because in a vast, noisy world full of pressure to do something great, people often forget a small act can still make a very big difference. In life, most of us are haunted by scale, by achievement, by numbers. From childhood, we're taught that only big deeds count as success and deserve recognition. So many grow up with the default belief, if you can't save the whole ocean, saving one fish isn't worth anything. But the truth is simple, everything great begins with the small. A single drop in the ocean may seem meaningless, but it is those very drops gathered that become great waves. A tiny seed may seem unworthy of attention, but that seed, if patiently tended, will grow into a forest. So too, a small act can quietly become the start of very large change. Psychologists once conducted an interesting study about this. They found that when a person performs even a small, kind act, holding a door for a stranger, smiling at a server, or simply picking up a stranded fish and returning it to the sea, the brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter linked to happiness and motivation. The wonder is, when people feel happy, they tend to keep doing more kind things. One small action creates a chain of positive reactions like ripples spreading when a pebble drops into still water. That small act, therefore, is not small at all, because it opens the door to countless good things that follow. The problem is, people often belittle little things, to the point they don't start at all. Many have sighed, "This world has too many problems. No effort can change anything." But the truth is, you don't need to change the whole world. You only need to change someone's world. Like that child, it couldn't save the entire beach, but it saved one fish. And for that fish, it was the whole world. Have you ever passed up a chance to do good because you thought it too small to matter? Maybe you didn't clear a leaf blocking a drain because it won't fix anything. Didn't stop to help an elderly person cross because someone else will. Didn't comfort someone sad because I can't erase all their pain. Yet the small thing overlooked may be the one thing someone needs not to collapse today. We live in an age that glorifies big impact, but forgets that big impact is built from countless small acts. No one can save the whole beach, but if each person saves one fish, the beach will have no dead fish. No one can heal all pain, but if each person heals one small hurt, the world will hurt far less. Notably, the child in the story didn't wait for praise, didn't need to be seen. It didn't stand in the middle of the beach to lecture, didn't film a video to post online. It simply saw a life that needed living and acted. Many young people today live under enormous pressure, often feeling meaningless, feeling their presence changes nothing. But a question we should ask is, if a small candle can light a dark room, can we call it meaningless? A small act is the same. It doesn't need to light the whole world, only the place where you stand. Scientists call this the social contagion of behavior. They've found that kind actions are powerfully contagious. When one person does something good, those who witness it are more likely to do good as well, and the ripple can spread through up to 3 degrees of social connection. Meaning a small act today can quietly change the lives of people you'll never meet. You save a fish. The fisherman who saw you goes home and treats his family more gently. His wife, in turn, is less harsh with a coworker. That coworker goes home and doesn't take stress out on the kids. A child sleeps peacefully that night because someone bent down to save a small fish. In this society, people often mock small deeds as useless. But the most useless thing isn't the small deed, it's indifference. Indifference is what lets harm persist, lets pain linger, lets injustice take root. A small act may not be enough to change the world, but a small act of indifference is enough to ensure the world never changes. The Buddha once taught, drops of water falling one by one will fill the vessel. There's no need to do something grand. Just keep sowing small goodness and let time do the rest. Because the smallest things, if steadfast, become the greatest things. Maybe today, you can do only something very small, a check-in, a hand to hold a gentle look. But who knows, perhaps that small thing is the reason someone takes one more step. Like that child, no promises, no calculations, no need for credit. Just bend down, pick up and release back to the sea. Amid this busy churn, the most precious thing isn't how many big deeds you accomplish, but that you keep a heart like the child on that morning beach. See what needs doing and do it. Even if it's small, even if no one knows. Because real value isn't in the number, but in the sincerity placed into each act. And kindness, if steadfast, always begins with small things like these. On an early summer morning, the sky was so clear, it felt as if you could see right through to each fine strand of sunlight weaving together. The sun had just tilted across the mossy old tiles of the monastery, nestled along the hillside, laying honey-like streaks of light over each red clay brick as if melting. A gentle morning breeze slipped through the rows of old wooden corridors, making the wind chimes on the porch ring with tiny, clear notes, like drops of water falling into a still lake. Behind the main hall was a small garden shaded by lush green bamboo groves. The scent of damp earth mingled with fresh grass, cool and pure like the breath of early morning. And right there, beneath an old bamboo clump on a mossy carpet still beaded with night dew, lay a baby bird, motionless, tiny, soaked, and nearly still. Its feathers were sparse, stuck to the skin like fine wet threads. Its eyes were half closed, the lids trembling each time a breeze passed. Its tiny beak parted, as if trying to draw a little air while its small wings quivered weakly with each attempt to lift its head. Perhaps the strong wind in the night had knocked it from the nest, blowing it out of its little safe haven among the high leaves. All around was quiet. Its mother was nowhere in sight, only the faraway chime of the wind bells and the soft rustle of bamboo leaves brushing together like the garden's whispered hush. A nun was sweeping the courtyard. The old bamboo broom pulled slow lines across the sun-dappled brick floor. The swish of the broom was steady, rhythmic, like breathing. Then suddenly she stopped. Amid the familiar sounds of morning bells, leaves, wind, There was another sound, very small, very thin, like a broken sigh. She tilted her head and listened. The faint chirp came again, trembling so weak it seemed it would vanish if no one heard it. She set the broom down and walked slowly toward the garden behind the main hall. And there, under the old bamboo, she saw it a baby bird smaller than her palm, curled up like a dry bud. She bent down. Without the slightest hesitation or fear, she lifted it with both hands, very slowly, very gently, as if holding a fragile drop of dew that might shatter at any moment. The little bird hardly reacted, only shivered when her fingers touched it. Its body was ice cold, weighing less than half a breath. She stood still for a moment, looking at the tiny life nestled in her hands, its eyes slowly opening and then closing again from exhaustion. Then she turned and walked back to her room. From that day on, life in the monastery seemed to slow by a beat. Each morning, as the ritual bell fell silent, and while the other nuns tidied the meditation garden, she would sit by her window, prepare a little thin porridge, and feed drops of it into the baby bird's tiny beak with a straw. At first, it wouldn't eat head tilted to one side, tiny feet pushing weakly at the air. She was patient. Each drop light as mist she fed into its mouth drop by drop until it began to swallow. She lined a small nest with scraps of soft cloth, placed it in a bamboo box, and set the box by the east-facing window to catch the morning sun. When the wind picked up, she closed the window part way and covered it with a thin cloth to keep it warm. When the sun grew strong, she pulled the box into the shade so the light fell slantwise like a little summer parasol. And each night, when the monastery fell completely still, she would stop by to check the faint rise and fall of the tiny chest. Day after day, the bird grew, very slowly but surely. Its pale gray down began to fluff up, then shift toward a light brown. Eyes that once stayed half shut now opened wide, glistening like two sunlit beads. Its weak chirp became clear, ringing a small note, threading itself into the early morning chanting. It began to hop clumsily around the bamboo box, tiny legs awkward but eager. Whenever the nun came near, it would spring up as if to greet her, little wings flapping, as though it wanted to fly, as though it wanted to say something, even it didn't understand. The whole monastery seemed gentler. Whenever the bird's clear song sounded from the window, a few young nuns would secretly smile while she simply nodded quietly and continued feeding it. Ground toasted rice grain by grain, clear water, drop by drop, as if nothing were more important. Then one morning, when the summer sun poured gold across the brick courtyard, the garden seemed to brighten in a peculiar way. The bamboo clumps swayed lightly, casting shimmering bands like green silk. The wind chimes rang higher than usual, spilling through the sunlight, as if to announce something about to happen. The little bird stood on the rim of the bamboo box wings, now covered in sleek brown feathers, eyes sparkling. It hesitated, looking out at the vast sky ahead. A light breeze lifted the fine feathers on its head. Then suddenly it flapped. Once, twice, 3 times. And as if the whole garden were holding its breath, the bird sprang from the windowsill, shot into the air, tilted, and then climbed a tiny curve against the deep blue sky. The nun stood quietly by the window. Sunlight glittered across her gentle face, lined with fine wrinkles like strokes of wind. She said nothing, only smiled softly. Her lips trembled. Her eyes shone in the light. The bird vanished beyond the distant green bamboo, leaving a clear stillness so pure you could hear your own heartbeat. And the monastery seemed to return to its quiet, steady breath, except for one thing on the wooden windowsill. An empty bamboo box remained, with a single tiny feather left behind, glinting in the sun like a farewell. To many, that might seem too small to matter, but to the nun, it was the most natural thing, because her heart held compassion. And compassion does not distinguish big from small, noble from lowly, human from animal. Compassion simply cannot turn away from a life that needs to live. In today's world, as people scramble and compete for every chance, every seat, we often pause only for things deemed worth it, worth our time, worth our money, worth the scraps of attention left after the grind. And the very small things, a fallen chick, a wilted flower by the roadside, or a fleeting sad glance at a street corner, are often dismissed as not worth stopping for. Yet it is precisely the small things we're willing to stop for that measure true compassion. Because compassion is never defined by scale. It is defined by willingness, the willingness to stop even for a minute and look closely at a fragile life that needs a hand. Scientists have found something quite interesting. When people care for a small creature, especially a young or vulnerable animal, the brain releases oxytocin, the hormone of bonding and affection. Oxytocin not only reduces anxiety, soothes the heartbeat, and lowers blood pressure, it also increases feelings of trust, safety, and inner peace. That means when the nun patiently fed drop after drop of porridge and adjusted each tiny thread in the nest to keep the chick warm, she wasn't only raising a little life, she was quietly nurturing the compassion within herself. And so, compassion doesn't make people weaker, as many think it makes them steadier amid a turbulent world. Some say the world is too harsh to leave room for gentleness, that without hardness and coldness, you'll be trampled and left behind. But in truth, no one becomes great by being cold. Those who are truly strong are those who can be gentle with what is most fragile. Like that nun, while others hurried past, she stopped to lift a tiny life. No calculation of gain, no need to be seen, no waiting for praise. She simply could not keep walking, knowing a small life trembled under that bamboo. People often ask, is compassion practical in a world full of competition? The truth is, compassion is not abandoning the world. It is choosing not to lose our humanity in a competitive world. For if we live without caring for even a small life, then, no matter how great the victory, it is an empty shell like a bare mountaintop, tall, but cold and alone. What moved people most about the nun was not only her kindness, but her patience. Raising a fledgling is not easy. It requires hour-by-hour care, early rising attention to tiny details, temperature, food, hygiene, environment. It demands daily perseverance, though no one sees the effort and no praise awaits at day's end. And that is exactly what many today lack: the desire to love without the patience to love all the way. Psychologists call this delayed gratification, the ability to stay with a long process without quitting midway. Those who cultivate this patience, research shows, tend to be less stressed, less impulsive, and more likely to live happily. Patience is not weakness. Patience is compassion in its deepest form. Because when you truly care for someone, you don't force them to grow fast or be perfect right away. You simply keep company bit by bit like the nun feeding the chick, drop by drop each morning, unhurried, unwavering. The most precious things in life all need time to grow. A seed needs time to become a tree. A child needs time to mature. Affection needs time to become compassion. And in an age when everything must be fast, being patient, with a small life is a gentle yet powerful act of resistance. For love is not just a burst of feeling. Love is endurance day after day, quiet and unhurried. The nun did not keep the bird, though she had lived with it hour by hour. When it had enough feathers and strength, she opened the window and let it fly. She did not hold it back, did not block its way, did not weep. She simply stood, smiling softly, watching it soar into the wide sky. She understood. To love is not to keep. To love is to help it grow, then set it free. And that is the reminder needed by anyone who is a parent, a teacher, a guide. Love is not possession. It is protecting a life long enough for it to be free. In this society, people think strength lies in control. But true strength lies in knowing when to let go. For if you keep holding on, a bird will never learn to fly. When you dare to let go, you give it the sky. And at that moment, compassion rises to a deeper level, no longer just rescue, but liberation. If each of us would pause to cradle one small life along the way, the world would be so much gentler. The nun did not change the whole world, but she changed the whole world for one little bird. And for that bird, it was everything. Someone once asked, "How do you begin to cultivate compassion?" The answer is very simple. Start with the smallest thing, with a fallen chick, with a wilted flower that needs water, with a person collapsing who needs a hand. Compassion does not begin with grand acts. It begins with a moment when you cannot turn away. And then those small acts accumulate, growing compassion, growing the gentle strength within each of us. The way the nun raised a tiny life and raised the compassion in her own heart. That day, winter was at its peak. The sky was a dull gray as if covered by a heavy sheet of lead. Sunlight had vanished from the world. From the mountaintop, the wind lashed down in long strokes like steel whips so biting that every exhale turned into a thin white mist and was instantly torn apart in midair. The narrow path leading to the ancient temple wound like a gray thread across the mountainside, now almost completely hidden by snow. The snow lay thick, compacted into hard ice, so slick that a single misstep could send you plunging straight into the deep ravine below. Each step sank down. Each lift of the foot was a battle with the weight of one's own body. There was not a sound. Only the wind shrieking through rock crevices like the howl of wandering spirits, and now and then the snap of a branch breaking under the weight of snow. On that path, there was an old man. He wore a worn cotton coat with frayed seams and held a crooked wooden staff, taking tiny steps as if probing each patch of ground beneath him. His back was bent like an old bow that had lost its spring, shivering as the cold wind whipped every fiber of flesh. Each time he lifted a foot, the hard snow seemed to hold it back, making it hard to leave the ground. Every few steps he would halt, panting, his thin, wrinkled hands purplish from the cold, gripping the staff tight. A fine sheen of sweat covered his brow, and it froze at once into tiny, glittering beads of ice. Ahead lay a small slope. It wasn't steep, but it was covered in a thick glaze of ice, smooth as a mirror. One slip, and he could slide down, fold over onto the frozen ground, and never rise again. Just then, a figure appeared at the far end of the path. A simple gray cloak fluttered in the wind like a wisp of smoke. The footsteps were so light they nearly left no trace in the snow. He approached with a gentle gaze, deep as a winter lake, quietly observing the old man trembling before the white, icy descent. He asked nothing. He didn't rush to help. He simply stood there in silence, the wind tossing his cloak strands of black hair threaded with gray, playing around a calm face, long accustomed to the world's cold. Then he moved closer. When he was only a few steps away, he suddenly stopped. His eyes followed the slick, icy slope ahead, what had once been a path, now a white trap. He bent down, then slowly knelt on the snow. The snow was so cold, it felt like thousands of needles piercing through his thin clothing, but he did not flinch. He drew a deep breath, his shoulders trembled slightly, and then he lay down. On the white snow, his slender body stretched out into a living bridge. The wind gusted past whirling flakes around him like shattered silver petals. A dark red streak seeped across his back where the freezing snow pressed through the fabric to his skin, but he remained still, unmoving like an ancient stone set against a river of ice sweeping everything away. The old man stood frozen. In his age-dimmed eyes, a tiny light flickered like someone had just lit an oil lamp in a room that had been dark for far too long. He extended his staff, feeling his way forward. His frail feet stepped onto the warm back of the man, one step at a time. Each step felt like treading on the memories of his youth, fearful, yet pouring all his trust into it. He clutched the staff, mustering every remaining ounce of strength in his withered body for each step. And so step by step he crossed the dangerous icy slope on the body of a bodhisattva serving as a bridge. When he reached the other side, he nearly collapsed from exhaustion. He turned to offer thanks, but the slope now held only a long imprint, a trace where a body had lain down, then risen, then silently gone on. The bodhisattva's figure had vanished into the distance. Only a few snowflakes clung to the edge of his cloak, fluttering in the wind, as if nothing had happened. He brushed the snow lightly from his shoulder and continued on back, straight, bearing the calm air of a traveler passing through an ordinary winter's day. No words, no thanks. Only an icy slope that had just been turned into a warm passage by the quiet act of one person lying down. And the snow kept falling white, covering all traces. Only one thing could not be erased, the gentle warmth just sown into the coldest winter of a human life. That story still renders the heart silent each time it's recalled, because in today's world, where everyone strives to stand higher, move faster, and secure safer ground, the image of someone lying down so another can pass seems impossible. Yet, it is the clearest proof of true compassion. For compassion is not speaking gentle words nor doing good only when it's easy. At its deepest, compassion is the courage to sacrifice, and sacrifice is the shortest path to slip free of the heavy ego that binds us day after day. We often think liberation means letting go of possessions, desires, and anger. But one of the most direct ways to be free of the self that always demands more victory and being right is to bow down for someone else. Because when you are willing to lie down so another can cross, you are no longer the center of the world. You become a bridge, and bridges do not need glory. They only need to be steady, so others can pass in safety. Some doubt is sacrifice foolish, if others may never be grateful. It's not a wrong question, but it forgets something. Loving kindness doesn't wait for repayment. If a good deed is done to earn thanks, it is no longer compassion, it is a transaction. True compassion is not bearing to watch someone fall when you could help them up. The Bodhisattva in the story did not need the old man to remember his name. He only needed him to cross safely, and that is what made him great. In modern life, many quietly help others and then feel disappointed when they are not repaid. That is human, very natural. But look deeper. Gratitude is not the reason to love, another's life is the reason. The aim of love is not to be acknowledged, but to lighten suffering present before our eyes. Neuroscientists once ran a fascinating study. They asked a group to perform small sacrifices for others, giving up a share of a reward, sharing time to help a stranger. Results showed heightened activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, the region tied to empathy and emotional regulation. In other words, when we sacrifice for others, the brain does not feel loss, it feels happiness and peace. Sacrifice doesn't make us less, it makes us lighter. Yet in today's society, many live as if they must always be on top, always strong, always superior. They dare not be vulnerable, step back, or lie down for fear of being trampled. But the paradox is this: the one who dares to lie down is the strongest of all. Because to lie down, you must conquer the ego, accept being forgotten, stepped on, left behind, so long as someone else passes safely. And once the fear of losing advantage, face status, or victory falls away, we are truly free. In the Buddhist teaching, this is called non-self. Non-self does not mean vanishing. It means existing like a river flowing to lift everything up, keeping nothing for oneself. The Bodhisattva lay on the snow, not because he was weak. He lay down because he no longer needed to be above anyone. And precisely, when you no longer need to be above anyone, your heart is wide enough to embrace the whole world. Some will say, the world is too harsh. If I don't look after myself first, who will? That sounds reasonable. But ask the reverse. If everyone looks only after themselves, who will be the first to lie down so others won't fall? If no one does it, the world will be nothing but slick slopes, and no one will have the strength to reach the other side. Psychologists call this social role modeling. They've found that when people witness an altruistic act, they tend to imitate and continue it. That is, each time someone lies down so another can cross, they not only save one person, they sow the seeds of compassion in all who watch. Those seeds, though quiet, will sprout. An act without a name, without thanks, yet living on in the hearts of witnesses, spreading much farther than we know. The Buddha taught, a leaf does not wait for thanks from the branch to fall. Water does not wait for thanks from the source to flow. Sacrifice does not need recognition for its true reward, is not outside, but in the inner peace of the giver's heart. No one applauds bridges, but no one reaches the far shore without them. The bridge may vanish beneath the snow, but the compassion it planted endures. Because love is not a word. Love is a concrete act, not thinking I care, but quietly lying down so another can cross. Not waiting for thanks, but feeling lighter, knowing they are safe even if they never know who saved them. If you must live in a noisy world where everyone demands more, bigger, louder, remember the image of the Bodhisattva lying on the snow. No applause, no name called, only a life saved, and a soul light as the wind. Because sometimes the fastest way to rise above the ego is to bow down. That night, the sky looked as if it had been coated with a thin layer of silver. A crescent moon hung suspended, slender and cold like a thin blade, its pale light spilling into the temple courtyard in long mottled bands reflecting on the dew-damp stone as if countless drops of water had frozen in midair. The night wind drifted through the ancient pines encircling the monastery. Each cluster of leaves trembled softly, creating a rustle like the furtive whispers of the dark. At the far end of the garden, where the moonlight touched only half the moss-covered roof tiles, there was a small hermitage. In the room lit by a single flickering oil lamp, a monk sat motionless like a statue. His eyes were half closed, his breathing, even his posture, upright like a pine trunk in a storm. Everything was steeped in such dense stillness that even each drop of wax falling into the lamp's dish sounded clearly. The old wooden door suddenly creaked open without a sound. Through the crack, a dark figure slipped in, moving on tiptoe, light as a cat's shadow. He held his breath, every muscle tight, afraid the slightest noise would make the monk open his eyes. Moonlight slanted through the doorway and lit up the gaunt face and darting eyes of the intruder. He glanced quickly around, then quietly went toward an old wooden chest tucked close to the wall, the only thing in the simple cell that seemed of any value. His bony fingers trembled as he lifted the lid. The faint hinge squeak rang out in the still night like a clap of thunder. There was no gold or silver in the chest, nothing of worth, only a faded brown robe patched all over and a few worn items. He frowned with disappointment for an instant, but still quickly grabbed the robe, turned in haste, and headed for the door. The door gave a soft creak as he pushed it. That small sound made the monk open his eyes. He didn't start. He didn't spring up. Not even a frown. He merely turned his head slowly toward the dark figure lingering on the porch, his clear eyes quiet under the moonlight like an unruffled lake. The thief jolted, frozen mid-step. His heart pounded. Then, driven by instinct, he bolted into the night, his silhouette staggering among moon-washed trees. The monk sat still for a moment, then rose unhurriedly. Without any haste, he went to the wooden wall where his thickest cloak hung, a coarse gray wool garment, still holding a trace of warmth from the last time he wore it. He took it down and stepped onto the porch. The soft sound of grass sandals against the damp stone echoed like falling leaves. Moonlight spread a thin sheen across his shoulders as he called out, his voice low and light as the wind. "It's cold tonight. Take this too, to keep warm." In the perfectly silent night, that voice was like a drop falling into a still pond, not loud but rippling the entire surface. The figure in the distance halted. He turned, eyes wide with shock, unable to believe what he'd heard. Under the pale crescent moon, the monk stood there, straight-backed hands raised, offering the cloak as if presenting a precious gift. No rebuke, no angry glare, only a gentle gaze, deep and quiet as the night. The night wind passed, making the wind chime under the eaves ring softly. The thief stood petrified as if turned to stone. For the first time, the moonlight in his eyes no longer seemed cold, but as if it were shining from the very person before him. His hand shook. His steps slowed. Like a sleepwalker, he approached, not daring to lift his face, and quietly received the cloak from the monk's hands. The lingering warmth in the coarse fabric touched his fingers and seemed to wake his whole body. He said nothing, only bowed very low, then turned and rushed into the night as if afraid that gentle light would make him burst into tears. His shadow faded among the pines. Only the hurried crunch of his footsteps on dry leaves remained. The monk stood there a long time watching his eyes, neither sad nor glad, with no regret. Then he smiled faintly, a smile, as light and thin as the moonlight that night. He returned to the little hermitage. The oil lamp still burned dimly, its tilted flame nodding as if welcoming him back. He sat down in his former place, pressed his palms together, closed his eyes, and resumed meditation. Outside, the crescent moon still hung in the sky, its light pouring over the stone courtyard like flowing water, cold and crystal clear. The wooden door, left slightly ajar, stirred in the wind and creaked softly as if nothing had happened. That story may sound paradoxical, yet it holds a great lesson, knowing how to let go so you won't be hurt. In a world that teaches us to protect what's ours, to hold tightly, to fight, so as not to lose our share, the monk's act that night was like a contrary wind. When the only thing left to him was taken, he did not grow angry, did not give chase, did not resent. On the contrary, he offered another cloak so the thief wouldn't be cold. That was not weakness. It revealed another kind of strength, the strength of a mind unbound by possession. In modern life, people's first reflex to loss is almost always anger. We're taught that if we don't resist, don't get angry, don't demand justice, we'll be trampled. But if we noticed, anger has never returned. What was lost, it only takes something more precious: inner peace. Each time we get angry, the heart races, the breath quickens, the body feels like it's burning from within. That sensation isn't just a passing mood, it's a real biological reaction. Neuroscientists have shown that when people are angry, the brain releases cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol raises blood pressure, and heart rate weakens the immune system and drains the body's energy. Conversely, those who know how to forgive and let go tend to have lower cortisol, sleep better, feel less anxious, and live longer than average. Meaning, letting go saves not only the soul, but also the body. The monk that night did not choose anger, so he wasn't burned from within. He chose release so he could sit calmly in the cold night, his heart light as the wind. While most people think holding on is strength, the truth is the opposite. Real strength lies in the ability to set down. If you clutch a burning coal to throw back at someone, your hand is the first to be burned. Open your hand, the coal falls, and your hand can heal. Letting go isn't defeat. It's refusing to let the mind be imprisoned by what's already gone. People often ask, if you keep letting go, won't others take advantage? It's a familiar question, but also a trap that keeps us from ever being free. The difference is this: those who are taken advantage of are those who give with resentment. Those who are free are those who give with compassion. The monk was not exploited because he didn't let anyone steal his peace. No one can take what has been willingly released. In modern life, many live as if gripping everything in their hands, holding money, status, image, every last word in an argument. But the tighter the grip, the more exhausted they become. The more there is to protect, the more fear of loss, and fear is what erodes peace the fastest. The monk had nothing to lose, so he feared nothing, because he chose to live with an open hand, not a clenched fist. Psychologists call this a non-attachment mindset. People who live this way do not define their value by possessions or fame. So when those things are lost, they suffer less, recover faster, and live more freely. Letting go doesn't make them weaker. On the contrary, it helps them pass through upheaval with their spirit intact. For in truth, pain doesn't come from the thing lost, but from how we identify ourselves with it. We don't just lose a cloak, we lose the self that once owned that cloak. We don't just lose money, we lose the self that believed its worth lay in that money. And precisely because he didn't identify with possessions, the monk felt no pain when they were gone. He didn't chase the thief not out of indifference, but because he refused to let his mind be chained to loss. The only thing he did was offer another cloak so the thief wouldn't be cold, because his compassion was stronger than his anger. In that moment, he was freer than the one who had taken from him. In the scriptures, the Buddha taught, "Nothing burns the mind faster than anger, and nothing soothes it faster than compassion." Compassion is not weak submission. It is the strength of one who doesn't need to win. When you don't need to win, you no longer fear losing. And when you no longer fear losing, you are truly at ease. In this life, everyone will lose many things: money, belongings, opportunities, sometimes even people they love. But if each loss drags our heart down, life becomes nothing but endless sinking and rising. If we learn to let go, we become like a leaf on water. The current may change, but the leaf remains at peace. Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means choosing peace over possession. The monk didn't need to keep the cloak, because he knew true value isn't in cloth, but in the quiet of a mind free from clinging. And that made him richer than any treasure. If each of us chose peace over one moment of anger, how much gentler the world would be. The monk didn't change the whole world. He only changed how he responded to loss. But that alone was enough to keep his inner world from collapsing. In the end, no one truly takes anything from us if we are willing to give. And when there's nothing left to lose, we can live each moment fully, without fear, resentment, or regret. Like the monk that night, no need to keep the cloak, only to keep the mind. And when the mind is kept, no one can steal your peace. That afternoon, rain fell like silver threads stretched across the sky. The mossy temple roof bowed quietly in the thin rain. Droplets fell from the eaves onto the old stone steps, shattering into tiny circles and then vanishing without a trace. The air was filled with a gentle scent of incense. The rain sound blended with the clink of wind chimes like time breathing slowly. The temple gate suddenly swung open. A man rushed in, clothes-soaked hair plastered to his forehead, breath broken. His eyes were red, his hand clenched a crumpled sheet of paper, as if clutching the last sliver of hope. He fell to his knees on the wooden porch, his voice breaking in the rain. At the nearby hospital, there's a patient in critical condition, needs an urgent transfusion, a very rare blood type. No one in the family matches. We've searched everywhere. Please help. That plea dropped like a small pebble onto a still lake, sending long ripples through the hushed air. The monk, sitting quietly under the eaves, stood up. He didn't ask who the patient was, didn't probe whether they had lived well or badly, didn't weigh whether they were worthy. He only nodded lightly, as one might nod to a passing breeze, took an old raincoat and put it on. Then, with the man, he stepped into the thick rain-cold drops, lashing his face, soaking through the thin coat down to his skin. The road to the hospital wound through flooded fields, muddy and slippery. The wind slanted in gusts, carrying the raw smell of wet earth. The man hurried ahead, feet sinking deep into the mud with each step, while the monk walked steadily, unhurried, hands folded before his chest, eyes straight ahead, as if moving through a walking meditation. Each step seemed untouched by the buffeting rain and wind, as though he carried a private stillness through the chaos. At the hospital, the corridor glowed a pale yellow. The air was thick with disinfectant. The man hurriedly presented the test form, his voice shaking with tension. Nurses immediately led the monk to the blood-typing room. He sat rolled up, his sleeve skin pale under the light, thin blue veins standing out like leaf veins. The result came quickly, an extremely rare type, a perfect match for the patient. Without a second's hesitation, the monk quietly lay on the donation bed. The needle slid into the vein. Dark red blood began flowing through the clear tubing, drop by drop, falling as steadily as the rain outside. In the adjacent recovery room, the patient lay in deep coma, breath-weak chest barely rising under a white blanket. No one knew who he was, what he had done, whether he had lived kindly or cruelly, whom he had loved or hurt. No one knew whether he deserved to be saved. The monk didn't need to know. In his eyes, life mattered more than any reasoning. The blood dripping through the line was like drops of time pulling back a life slipping from the edge between life and death. The room was utterly silent, save for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Fluorescent light cast a cold pallor over his skin. Even so, his expression remained calm, as if nothing special were happening. When the needle was removed, the monk sat up. His lips were a little pale, his eyes slightly sunken from the loss of blood, but his gaze was still bright and at ease. He pressed his palms together and bowed very slightly toward the motionless patient, as if bowing to a precious life just given another chance to breathe. Without a word, he stood and stepped into the long corridor, bathed in soft yellow light. His raincoat was still soaked. Droplets fell to the floor with light taps mingling with the faint announcements from the nurse's station. The man started to call out, to ask his name, to say thank you, but the monk had already turned into the rain outside. His thin, small figure gradually disappeared into the milky downpour. Only the hem of his brown robe blurred in the gray water, then dissolved into the night as if he had never been there. No one knew who he was. No one had time to ask his name. Only his crimson blood kept flowing quietly in the veins of a stranger, like a hidden beat extending a life, needing no credit, needing no one to remember. Each time it's recalled, that story still quiets the heart, because it isn't only about a monk donating blood to save a stranger. It's a deep reminder of what we often forget in the rush of life. Compassion reaches beyond all boundaries of acquaintance. In today's world, people are taught to sort and judge each other almost by instinct. We label someone one of ours, family, friends, colleagues, and reserve our concern, protection, and care for them. With strangers, most of us keep our distance. Sometimes we even tell ourselves, we need to know if they deserve it before we help. But life doesn't distinguish between familiar and unknown. A heart that's stopping doesn't need to know who keeps it beating again, only that someone is willing to reach out a hand. The monk didn't need to know whether that patient was good or bad, rich or poor, whom he had helped or harmed. He heard only one thing: a life needed to live. And he acted. What made the act extraordinary was its simplicity. No calculations, no hesitation, no waiting to be convinced. He simply stepped into the rain, as if it were the most natural thing to do. What's interesting is that the lightness you feel after helping a stranger isn't just a passing emotion. Scientists have shown that when people do good, especially for strangers, the brain releases endorphins and oxytocin hormones linked to happiness, social bonding, and reduced stress. In other words, love needs no reason. It is a natural biological instinct if we're willing to listen. The problem is that modern life is too loud. The clamor of money, rivalry, and comparison drowns out the whisper of compassion. We hear a lot about how to get more and rarely about how to give. So many people gradually forget that we are born with the capacity to love. The monk did nothing miraculous. He simply didn't let the noise drown out the call of compassion. Someone once asked, what if the person saved later does harm? It sounds reasonable because we're used to conditional love, loving because someone is good, worthy, or reciprocates. But true love needs no condition. When someone lies at the border of life and death, what they need is not a moral audit, but a drop of blood to go on breathing, like rain falling on cracked earth. Rain doesn't ask whether the ground deserves it. It simply falls because that is the nature of rain. Love is the same. It needs no reason to begin. Many people carry arguments that sound reasonable for not helping. They're not connected to me. They've never helped me. What if they're bad? But arguments don't sustain life, only action does. The monk didn't wait for enough information to be certain, because he understood a life doesn't wait for us to finish reasoning before it can be saved. In psychology, researchers call this universal compassion, the ability to feel another's pain, regardless of familiarity or enmity. Those who cultivate universal compassion tend to have lower stress, greater psychological resilience, and longer lifespans. That means when we open our hearts to everyone, we don't just save them. We save our own hearts from growing hard and numb. Think about it. If everyone chose to help only those they know who would be the first to extend a hand to a stranger on the verge of death. If everyone stood still waiting for someone else to act first, perhaps no one would be saved at all. Society survives not on ruthless competition, but on moments when someone decides to help a person they've never met, simply because they cannot bear to watch them fall. It is precisely those seemingly small acts that keep the world from collapsing into apathy. The monk didn't need thanks. He didn't need his name carved on stone or a golden statue raised in praise. He needed only for life to continue flowing. That blood, each red drop, carried no name, but carried nameless love. And that is what made him greater than any title. For compassion doesn't need to be seen to have value. It only needs to be given. The Buddha once taught, to see suffering and not awaken compassion is the beginning of suffering within yourself. When we are indifferent to others' pain, our hearts harden, drying out like soil without water. But when we allow compassion to live again, even in a small act, our hearts soften and warm as if refreshed by a light rain. Compassion not only saves another from death, it saves our own hearts from dying of indifference. In a life where everyone is in a hurry, perhaps what's needed most is not to run faster, but to pause long enough to notice who needs a drop of blood, a hand, a breath to keep living. Because sometimes a single drop we give is enough to keep a life from being extinguished. That day, the monk didn't save the entire world. He saved one person. But to that person, it was a whole world. And in the blood now flowing, a portion of compassion lives on, quiet, nameless, but indestructible. For compassion once given never disappears. It keeps moving silently through this life like small streams that keep the whole forest green. That afternoon, the sky pressed a heavy lead bowl over the fields. Gray clouds swelled like dough about to spill over the pot's rim, weighing on every breath. Wind swept in from the edge of the flats across the paddies, making the young rice bend low. The stalks folded, then sprang back up, rustling in a hurried way, like the earth and sky whispering their unease. The river that ran along the fields, usually gentle as a ribbon, changed color. That evening, the water turning muddy like coffee grounds, the surface foaming waves rearing and slapping hard against the bank, leaving dark streaks like fierce hands had clapped there. A farmer trudged along the narrow ridge with a load of straw across his shoulder. The yoke dug a red mark into his left shoulder. Sweat mixed with wind salted his skin. He walked fast, hoping to stack the straw on the shed roof before the rain poured down. The sharp scent of new straw, the raw smell of river water, the damp reek of mud rose up, summoning that urgent yet familiar feeling of storm season. His buffalo was usually tied to a stake near the reeds, chewing grass each evening, eyes half-closed, tail flicking at flies. It had worked with him through countless plowing seasons. Every field bank bore its hoofprints, every plow had heard its deep, steady breathing each morning. It wasn't just a draft animal. It was the silent companion of his life. A desperate cry ripped the air. A loud glug, then the splash of a heavy body crashing down. He jolted and looked up. Downriver a ways, a dark shape flailed in a whirl of current. The rope at the reeds had snapped who knew when, and the buffalo had been torn into midstream by the sudden surge. Each thrash sent white water spraying. Its round eyes opened wide in panic, nostrils snorting foam, mouth gaping as if to call out. But only desperate bubbling came out. He didn't hesitate a second. The straw load dropped onto the grassy bank with a thud, straw bursting in a bright gold scatter. The farmer kicked off his straw sandals, took 3 strides, and dove straight into the river. The water hit his chest like a shattered pane of glass, slammed his face like a hammer. The first time he struck the swirling bottom, he lost his footing, feeling as if a giant hand had grabbed his whole body and was yanking him down. He snorted hard and swallowed a gulp of brackish water. His throat burned, but his body reacted at once, arms cutting wide legs, kicking strong head, breaking the surface to gulp a long breath. The first drops of rain began to fall, pricking the river's skin like needles, stippling it with an endless field of tiny dots. The current was strangely strong. It dragged him diagonally toward the lower bend, where vortices spun the surface, dipping like a funnel. With each stroke, his arms felt leaden. His brown shirt soaked through clung to his skin. The pounding of blood in his ears drowned all sounds, but his hissing breath and the river's growl scraping against both banks. Ahead, the buffalo's dark head bobbed up and down. Each time it sank, its wide, rounded back and short horns disappeared, and only the eddying rings gathered as if to seal a fate. He lunged forward, reaching as if to tear the water open, forearm veins standing out chest-burning. A slanting wave slammed into him and knocked him aside. He turned, used the momentum, swam crosswise with the flow, then grabbed forward. From below, a frayed rope looped around the buffalo's neck suddenly brushed his wrist. Rough. Cold. He seized it. The rope, slick with mud and algae, nearly slipped free. He clenched tighter nails, digging into the hemp, the coarse fibers scoring his skin. A violent tug nearly wrenched his shoulder out of joint. The animal was dead weight, the whole river pulling the other way. He grit his teeth and hauled the dark head up. The buffalo's eyes bulged, pupils, quivering lashes clotted with white foam water, jetting from its nostrils in two thin streams. It flailed with all four legs, each kick smashing a sheet of water, pulling down, then shoving up, almost tearing the rope from his hand. Easy. Easy. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought repeated in his head, as if the animal could sense the calming frequency in his muscles, in the steady rhythm of his pull. He lowered his body, angled himself, so his face stayed toward shore, looped the rope around his left wrist, stroked with his right hand, and kicked in a steady brace. The bank seemed farther away. Every yard gained set his biceps aflame. Each wild thrash tightened the rope into a dark red ring around his wrist. The rain grew heavier. The river's surface blurred. The sky sunk so low it felt like the opposite bank was only a quiet shadow waiting. On shore, other farmers, having heard the cries, ran while shrugging off their raincoats, carrying bamboo poles. They shouted to each other, their voices shattering in the wind. One man edged along the bank and thrust a long pole out. Grab it, hold on. The pole smacked. The current drifted, then was hauled back. The man in the water glanced, gauged, and chose his line using the very swirl to sling himself and the buffalo toward the pole. One hard kick, hips seeming to split, he looped the rope around the pole. Two men on shore clamped down, feet slipping so mud sprayed, but they held on for dear life. The whole man-pole rope buffalo system stretched like a taut string, shivering. The buffalo sank again, its body-heavy lungs flooded, legs thrashing. The farmer took a deep breath, dove with it, hugged the short horns, pulled the rope with the other hand, his whole body stretched like a paddle. A dense darkness pressed in. His ears roared. Bubbles burst right before his eyes. His chest felt ready to explode. He arched his neck, poured his remaining strength into levering the sinking head upward. A hot blast of water shot from the buffalo's nostrils into his face as it surfaced, searing like fire in the cold rain. Two more men grabbed the pole. In unison, they counted the rhythm, pull, give, timing, with the wave pushing toward shore. With each swell, they won about a handspan and another. The farmer's arms burned raw, his shoulders spasmed. Cramps seized his legs. He clenched his jaw, narrowed his eyes, and imagined another rope looped around his own waist, tied from the bank to the earth like an anchor. "Come on," someone screamed hoarsely from shore. A child hugged a raincoat and trembled, wide eyes brimming for reasons unknown, rain or something else. And then something shifted. In the shallows, there was a ridge of mud. When the buffalo's hooves found it, it stopped its frantic thrashing and began to push in a directed rhythm. The man in the water used that kick to drive toward the pole. Everyone on shore, as if one body, heaved and yanked. A ripping sound rose the river, letting go of its prey. The buffalo's heavy black mass slapped onto the thick grass at the bank. The man released the rope, slapped both hands onto the bank, and clawed at the roots to drag himself up. His back slid, belly scraped along the mud knees, gouged grooves. Hands reached down from above underarms, back armpits, hauling him clear of the edge. At the same time, two others looped the rope around the buffalo's chest, braced hard, and hauled it up the embankment, bit by bit. Its hooves carved deep into the soft bank, slipped, then found purchase. The animal stood shaking violently, body-drenched water running in muddy streams along the black hide. Its ears pricked and drooped, tail lashing nostrils, snorting eyes still wide with panic, pupils quivering as if tracking a nightmare not yet gone. The farmer collapsed onto the grass, back to the ground, staring up at the dull gray sky. Rain fell straight into his face, mixing with salty sweat. His chest pumped like bellows. Each breath felt like a blade slashing through his ribs from cold and exhaustion. His arms were limp, his left hand still clenched reflexively, as if gripping the rope in the water. Someone ran for a blanket. Someone else started a fire with dry straw under a lean-to. Blue smoke crawled low in the rain-stinging eyes. One person poured warm water into the buffalo's mouth and rubbed hard along its neck. The child knelt to unloop the rope, now red and bloody from the farmer's wrist, whispering something too soft to make out. He lay a while longer, then slowly sat up. His whole body shook as if seized by a fever teeth chattering. But the corners of his mouth tugged up a thin, stubborn smile. In front of him, the buffalo shook its head hard, blasted a spray of water, then suddenly sneezed loudly. The sneeze sounded like life returning to its chest, making the kids jump and laugh. It steadied, staggered 2 steps, then stopped and turned to look at him. In the soaked fur, its eyes still held a rim of panic, but a warm ring seeped out, faint as recognition that the firm bank beneath its hooves was still there. The wind shifted. River mist thinned into a light veil. Far clouds tore open, revealing a pale band of light behind the hills. The rain eased from heavy drops to a drizzle, then to dust. The faint croak of frogs rose somewhere tentative, like testing their voices after a long-held breath. The farmer pushed himself up from the grass, still breathing hard. Someone draped a coarse blanket over his shoulders. He waved it off with a smile, then slung the blanket around the buffalo's neck instead. His rough hand pressed to the animal's broad forehead, rubbed a circle, and paused between the short horns. "All right, let's go home." He spoke very softly, the sound almost blending into the last of the rain. The buffalo still trembled, but feeling that hand, its body eased. Its feet pointed themselves toward the path along the field bank, where scattered straw still smelled sharply sweet. Neighbors drifted away. One clapped his shoulder. Another quietly laid a solid hand on his still shaking arm. No one said much. Out here, a few words like brave or reckless were surplus. You just do what needs doing. The river had tried to claim its due that afternoon, but it hadn't gotten what it wanted. The straw bundle still lay flattened at the bank. He picked up a sheaf, wrung out the water, and smiled. Wet straws still useful. Then he gathered it up, tied it into a stack shirt plastered to his skin, each ordinary motion drawn from a store of strength that had just been emptied. The buffalo stood close, tipping its head now and then, eyes sliding toward him, as if guarding a distance measured by an invisible rope. The path home along the fields was muddy and slick now, but two dark shapes, a man and a buffalo, walked side by side. Fresh hoof prints stamped over old ones. Droplets clung to the rice tips along the bank and glittered. The smells of mud straw, wet hide, and rain mingled into the warm, dense fragrance of a farm village that had just passed a trial. At the yard's edge, the child came near, hands shaking, as it held out the rope, now rinsed clean of mud, in a rain puddle. It glanced at the red welt still wringing the farmer's wrist, lips pressed, tight eyes shining with water. Whether rain or something else, who could tell? The farmer smiled, tousled the child's hair, then handed over the rope, pointing. Tie it gently. The buffalo's still tired. His words were very soft, but sounded like a tender order to the child and to the animal. Today, everything needs a light touch. In the stall, dry straw had been tossed in. The trough holding rainwater was full in the corner. The buffalo went in snorting, sneezed again, then put its muzzle to the straw and chewed slowly. Each chew was a steady, sure beat of peace returning. The farmer leaned against a post and let out a long breath, eyes closing for just a moment. When he opened them, he saw in the buffalo's eyes a reflection of himself, standing still, worn out, soaked, but alive, bright as the earth's edge after rain. Outside, the rain had stopped for good. The clouds broke into patches and a fine band of light appeared at the horizon like a strip of silver silk. The river below stopped growling. The water was still muddy, but had smoothed. Only faint rings rippled where the last late raindrop fell. On the grass bank, which had writhed under many rescuers' feet, furrows of mud now showed like hurried lines, writing out an unforgettable moment. The farmer walked to the river once more. He stood there with hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking down at the stretch that had nearly swallowed 2 lives. A light wind blew. The grass along the bank bent in a soft sweep. He wasn't thinking big thoughts. Only a few simple images flashed in his mind yesterday morning: the buffalo waiting by the field, the shirk of the plow biting the soil, the smell of freshly dried straw, his wife calling from the kitchen, the child's peal of laughter. Those things braided into an invisible cord binding man, buffalo, field, and river. If one link snapped, everything would loosen and fall apart. He jumped into the water because he couldn't bear to let that cord break. When he turned away from the river, his shadow stretched long on the wet grass, blurring, then sharpening with his steps. In the sky, a last line of daylight poured over the fields, slanting across the shed roof, freshly thatched with wet straw, glimmering as if glazed anew. In the stall, the buffalo chewed another mouthful of straw and lifted its gaze. The dark pupils were deep, holding a piece of gray sky, a streak of muddy river, and the figure of a man who had just passed through rushing water. There were no applause, no shouts of well done, only a thin smile at the corner of a lined mouth, and a breath that slowed and lengthened a solid peace like the banked earth after water recedes. Evening settled. Frogs and crickets rose in chorus. A thin halo of yellow from the house lights rested on the night. The farmer stepped into the porch, raised his wrist to look at the red welt, and smiled softly, as if telling himself, "All right." That hand then gripped the doorframe. The other brushed the buffalo's side. They touched for a very brief moment, just long enough to know there are debts that never need a ledger. The debt of a murky gray afternoon, a plunge into cold water, and a trembling life that stood up and kept living. That story, which seems so ordinary, is in fact clear proof of a deep truth. Protecting life is an innate goodness within every person. The farmer didn't stop to measure and weigh, didn't compare the buffalo's economic value to his own life, didn't ask whether the act was worth it. He saw life about to be drowned, eyes wide with panic pleading in vain, and his first instinct was to save it. Not a calculated decision, but a natural reflex, like breathing, like a heartbeat, because love is already within each person, waiting for a moment to speak. In modern life, we often think we must be taught to love, must learn to be kind. We pin certificates and moral lessons to goodness set up rules of conduct. But love isn't a product of dogma. It is an underground stream running quietly in every heart, even if buried beneath life's dust. Scientists have shown that even newborns, when seeing others in pain, show strong activity in brain regions related to empathy, though they've never been taught ethics. This shows that goodness is instinct, not a social pretense. It's just that as we grow, the noise of life drowns out that gentle inner voice. So when the farmer plunged into the torrent to save his buffalo, he didn't do anything lofty or heroic. He simply let his natural goodness speak. And it is precisely that lack of calculation that makes his act nobler than any praise. All of us have had moments like that, so quick they seemed thoughtless, because we couldn't bear to see a creature suffer, scooping a kitten from a road of speeding cars, stopping to let a dog cross gently, freeing a butterfly from a web. Small acts, yet profound, because they prove our hearts can still tremble before life. And if we can still be moved, we are still human. Someone once asked, "Is it really necessary to risk yourself to save an animal?" A reasonable question for the mind, but not for the heart. At the border of life and death, every living thing is equally precious. The fear in a drowning buffalo's eyes is no different from the fear in a child's. And when compassion arises, it doesn't ask if the being is human or animal, noble or lowly. It only sees here as a life that needs to live. That is the essence of compassion. No selection, no distinction, no conditions. True love always surpasses the boundaries. Reason erects. What's admirable in the farmer is not only his love, but the courage born from that love. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting while shaking with fear. People think courage comes from muscle iron, will hardened grit, but the greatest courage comes from love. When love runs deep, we forget ourselves, and when the self falls away, fear dissolves. Psychologists have called this altruistic bravery, when a person witnesses another life in danger, especially a vulnerable creature. The brain regions for compassion light up while the fear processing regions are inhibited. True love can override fear and turn an ordinary person into a hero for a moment. The farmer wasn't a hero by title that day, but love made him braver than his usual self. That's also why those who love animals are often gentle with people. It's no accident. Studies show that people who regularly care for animals tend to have higher empathy, more positive communication, and less aggression. In learning to handle small creatures gently, we learn to soften with people too. Conversely, those numb to animals' suffering are often numb to others' pain. The heart is like a muscle. The more it's trained in gentleness, the more supple and strong it becomes. If left to harden, it curls in and grows cold. Today's world may make many believe you must be tough and cold to survive. But in truth, those who love life are the ones who keep their humanity and endure. The farmer didn't care what others thought of him. He didn't do it to be called good, didn't need applause, didn't trade for a reputation. He only wanted the buffalo to live. That alone made him nobler than any praise. True worth isn't in what we can boast of, but in what we quietly do, because we cannot turn away. Love needs no fanfare, yet it alone keeps this society from drying out. I remember the Buddha's words, "One who cherishes a single drop of water will not bear to dry up an entire river. One who cherishes a small life will not bear to harm any life. Those who can love animals can love people. Those who can love a fragile life will know how to cradle the fragile parts in those around them. Love, like an underground stream, can flow silently beneath this society. No display, no noise. Yet, it is the only thing that keeps the ground from cracking and people from turning to stone. The farmer didn't save the whole world that day. He saved one buffalo. But for that buffalo, he saved its entire world. And in the moment he plunged into the torrent, he also saved his own heart, kept it able to tremble for life. Only when we can still be moved do we deserve the name human. Perhaps if each of us would stop to save one small life, this world would be so much gentler. We don't all need to do grand things. We only need to keep a little love in our hearts, enough not to turn away when life needs a hand. Because that very love, even if as small as a drop of water, is enough to keep the river of our humanity from ever running dry. That noon, the sun wasn't harsh. It felt filtered through a thin cloth, falling into pale yellow squares on the old concrete floor. Cicadas buzzed in the crowns of the old flame trees, a steady droning, like a blanket of sound covering the schoolyard. Blossoms fell and scattered, speckling the steps with red mixed with a few dry leaves, making a broken yet warm little tableau. Hot wind slid through the crack of the classroom door, carrying the smell of chalk old wood, and a hint of the flame tree's sap, making the air both dry and faintly resinous. The lunch bell rang a few short notes. The classroom door swung open. The kids burst out like a clutch of fledglings, set free, clutching lunchboxes, paper bags, cookie tins, chirping to one another, jostling for seats under the shade of the flame trees. One showed off a golden omelet. Another popped a lid, and a puff of steam rose from rice with the savory whiff of braised fish drifting through. Another held out a tiny cookie like a newly found treasure. All of it melted into that clear kind of clamor you only hear in a village schoolyard. On the step near the classroom door, a small boy sat tucked in his back against a wooden pillar darkened by time. His white shirt wasn't crisply pressed, a little frayed at the elbows, but clean. He set an old yellowed newspaper bundle on his lap. The faded printed lines gleamed at an angle in the sunlight. His hands slowly opened each fold as if unfolding a long-kept letter, and finally, in the crinkled paper, a single round cookie appeared. It wasn't big. Its edge slightly cracked the scent of flour and sugar, softening in the noontime warmth. He looked at the cookie for a while. Maybe he'd waited all morning for this moment. His eyes shone with a small but complete joy, the simple kind only children have, happy to have something to eat, happy because a modest treat was resting in his hands. He lifted the cookie and inhaled, as if to keep the scent a moment longer, then brought it gently to his lips. Just then, a small figure slipped past. A classmate, slightly taller, hair tousled, big eyes, a uniform missing a button, stopped short, as if snagged by an invisible thread. His stomach growled loud enough to be heard even through the cicadas. His eyes fixed on the cookie lit with longing, then quickly dropped as if afraid of being caught looking. He hugged his thin, flattened school bag tight. Maybe he'd been too rushed to bring lunch that morning, or maybe there was nothing at home to bring. The smells wafting from the schoolyard slipped into his nose, a thin blade cutting straight into an empty gut. The boy holding the cookie seemed to hear that growl too. His hand paused in midair. A strip of light slid across his thin wrist like a golden thread. For a moment, the cicadas seemed to soften. Only a small heartbeat sounded somewhere deep in his chest. He turned. Their eyes met and then looked away. No words were spoken. Only something passed between them, light as a breeze. He lowered the cookie. His little hand turned it, slightly, thumb and forefinger set at the edge. He broke it. A soft crack, crisp like the thin shell of a memory, just split in two. Tiny crumbs fell onto the newspaper, clinging to the old printed lines like little grains of sunlight. He held out half to his friend. The motion was slow, but sure, as if he'd known what to do from the instant his hand stopped. The friend drew back for a second, eyes lifting and dropping again. There was something like pride, like embarrassment, like shyness, all mixed together, making him hesitate. But the boy only smiled softly, a smile that meant nothing but reassurance. Take it. That smile made all the awkwardness unnecessary. The friend reached out and accepted the piece. His fingers brushed the boy's for a moment, warm and slightly trembling. They sat down side by side, backs both resting against the polished pillar, worn smooth by generations. From a distance, they looked like two little leaves leaning together to keep off the noon sun. They took very small bites, chewing slowly, as if afraid the joy would run out if they ate too fast. The cookie was sweet and a bit dry, but in their mouths it softened. The sweetness slipped down their throats and then into their chests, where the hunger had just receded. With each chew, the corners of their eyes lifted. Their gazes met for a half second, then darted away again, bashful as if sharing a secret. A breeze swept the yard, making white shirts flutter. On the flame tree's branches, one cicada suddenly fell silent. Then a few others followed, opening a fragile pocket of quiet in the hiss of countless voices. From the kitchen in the corner of the yard, the smell of amaranth soup drifted up, blending with the scent of hot earth after sun, making the air thick but gentle. A teacher passed by and paused softly. She looked at the two, her eyes easing. She said nothing, just smiled and moved on her heels, tapping a slow rhythm on the concrete. On the opposite steps, a curious child watched. He scooped a spoon of rice and turned to look again at the way the two sat close, as if guarding the bit of sun falling around them. A short question flashed in his mind and faded like a sunbeam touching a cheek, then sliding off. If it were me, would I break it in half? It wasn't a question that needed answering right away. It just lay quiet somewhere, waiting for a day when it would be awakened. The cookie dwindled. Crumbs fell onto the newspaper. The boy tilted the paper, gathered them with a fingertip, and divided them evenly like an inborn habit of fairness. The friend ate down to the last bit, glanced up, lips moving as if to say thank you, then stopped. Sometimes a thank you makes a moment awkward. Silence keeps what just happened whole. The boy understood and gave a small nod. They sat a little longer, no longer eating, just watching the spots of sunlight move on the ground as if the light itself were sharing out portions. At the edge of the yard, a flame tree leaf spun down and landed beside the boy's worn plastic sandals. He picked it up, turned it into the wind, and blew gently. The leaf twirled and flew a little farther. His friend laughed a rough sound from a stomach no longer clawing. He took another leaf and did the same. The two leaves flew together, sliced through a tilted band of sunlight, and fell like two tiny sparks that burned no one. From far off, the class drum beat thum, 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 like someone tapping out the rhythm of summer noon. The schoolyard shifted. Children snapped lunch boxes shut, wrapped up snacks, and ran back to class, feet clattering across the concrete. The two on the steps stood up as well. The friend, without thinking, gave the boy's shoulder a quick squeeze, so quick he didn't notice himself. The boy gave a slight nod, folded the newspaper carefully into a neat square, and slipped it into his pocket as if keeping an invisible receipt for what they had just shared. On the blackboard, chalk trailed off mid-problem. In the classroom, the ceiling fan whirred. Chairs scraped, making a faint, drawn-out scratch. The boy opened his notebook. The pencil tip touched the page, his careful letters like a slender sunbeam sliding across the desk edge. His friend sat beside him, and now and then glanced over his eyes, no longer tight with hunger. In some small corner, where the stomach had stopped growling and the heart had lifted, the math problem got a bit easier, the handwriting a bit straighter, and the period stretched without feeling long. Outside, the sun still poured down, cicadas still buzzed, and flame blossoms still fell like a gentle rain of red. But in that summer noon, picture a light softer than sunlight just appeared, not dazzling, not showy, spreading quietly across two children's faces. That light didn't reflect from the sky. It came from half a cookie just broken. And when the dismissal bell rang that afternoon, that light followed them both like a thin sunbeam tucked in a shirt pocket, a kind of sun only those who shared could see. At first glance, the story is simple. Nothing big, just two children breaking a cookie in half under a mild noon sun. Yet that simplicity opens onto something adults often forget. By accident giving doesn't make us poorer. It makes the heart richer. We grow up in a world that keeps telling us to hold on, to accumulate, to stock up for scarcity, to grab more, so we won't be left behind. Because we hear that so often, when faced with sharing, our first instinct isn't love, it's fear. Fear that if we give, we'll lack. Fear that if we split our share, we'll lose out. Fear that if we yield, we'll fall behind. But the little boy in the schoolyard that day didn't think like that. He didn't weigh gain and loss, didn't calculate benefit and harm. He simply saw a friend who was hungry. And when you see someone who's hungry, the most natural reflex isn't to clutch your food, it's to divide it. As simple as that. It sounds small, but it touches the core of human nature. Neuroscientists have run many studies and found that when people give, especially when sharing food, the brain's reward center lights up, releasing dopamine, the neurotransmitter that creates feelings of happiness and satisfaction. In other words, when we give, the brain doesn't think we're losing. It behaves as if we're gaining. That's why people who share often even little things report higher satisfaction and happiness than those who only hold tight to what they have. Real joy isn't in what we clutch. It's in a grateful look in the relieved smile of the one who receives. Try to remember times you helped someone, even just offering an arm to an elderly person crossing the street or letting someone in a hurry go ahead in line. Those moments, even long past, can still warm you when you recall them. By contrast, have you ever hoarded something for yourself, only to find it didn't make you happier, just lonelier? What's held by only one person never fills a heart. But what's shared can fill two hearts at once, the givers and the receivers. Someone once asked, "But if I keep giving, what if I end up with nothing?" It's a common question adults are taught to plan ahead. But the truth is, giving isn't the same as losing. Giving turns what you have into something meaningful. Half a cookie kept might become a forgotten crumb. Split it can become a smile, a bond, a gentle memory that lingers long after the cookie is gone. What's most precious in the boy's act isn't how much he shared, it's how naturally he did it. No tallying, no fretting, no right or wrong ledger, no fear of losing out. He simply broke the cookie in two, as if that were obvious, as if sharing were as natural as breathing. In a child's heart, compassion isn't a virtue to be learned. It's a reflex, like closing our eyes when dust flies in like a heartbeat while we're alive. Psychologists call this innate empathy. From the time they toddle, children tend to offer their food to a crying friend and feel happy when their friend is happy. That shows children can teach adults about compassion because they haven't yet let fear of loss cloud their capacity to love. Adults often think they must have a lot before they can give. Children give even when they have only one, and that's why their joy is often more complete than adults. Children who share often smile more, not because they have more, but because they aren't afraid to lose. They eat less, but get twice the joy. The modern world teaches us how to own, but rarely how to share. It teaches us to win, but not how to keep going together. Meanwhile, a child breaking half a cookie accomplishes what the adult world is forgetting, connecting through kindness. No speeches, no slogans, no long pledges, just half a cookie and a warm glance. Compassion isn't noisy. It doesn't need applause, social posts, or recognition. It only needs to be given. When we learn to share the smallest things, we can share bigger things, time, listening, care, and empathy. Those are what build true peace, the Buddha taught. Those who share their food also share others' pain. Only when a heart is used to opening to small things can it be wide enough to hold the great ones. If someone can share a meal, they can also share a burden, a tear, the quiet sorrows of the person beside them. Imagine if everyone would give up a small part of what they have, just a very small part. No one would go hungry. No one would be alone. No one would have to carry everything all by themselves. Half a cookie may not fill a stomach, but it can be enough to keep someone from feeling abandoned. And sometimes not feeling abandoned is enough to help someone take one more step through the day. That day, the boy only saved a friend from a hungry lunch. But for that friend, he softened an entire world inside. In the simple smiles on two children's faces under the sunny schoolyard, perhaps that is the purest image of compassion the kind adults once had, but somehow dropped along the road to growing up. So whenever you can break the cookie in your hand in two to remind your heart giving doesn't make you poorer, it makes you richer in the gentlest and most lasting way. That afternoon, the sunlight gold like honey poured at an angle over the old stone-paved street, filtering through the broad leaves of ancient almond trees and spilling onto the road in mottled patches like patterned rugs laid down by time. A light breeze stirred gently, ringing the wind chimes hung along the eaves. Each thin tinkling note was like glass drops tapping together, echoing through the calm air of a day drawing to a close. On that street, people bustled about, shopwomen tidying up their baskets, schoolboys pedaling home in a hurry, small eateries lighting warm yellow lamps that cast a glow as gentle as a memory. In the midst of that lively rhythm, an elderly man with a thin frame walked slowly. His hair was snow-white, sparse and fine, like the last mist of the season lifting strand by strand in the breeze. He wore an old but clean light gray sweater and leaned on a wooden cane polished smooth by years. On his feet was a new pair of sandals. They were handmade from soft leather dark brown, the stitches still fresh and careful, like fine little threads, the edging shiny as if just polished. They didn't quite match his worn sweater, or his austere look like a luxury item misplaced in a too simple scene. Yet each step he took was slow and steady, as if he were counting out time with his whole heart. The street narrowed as it led to the old market. At the bend near the entrance where the paving stones were darker from the shadow of tall buildings blocking the late sun, the old man suddenly stopped. Right by the curb, a beggar sat huddled. He was so thin his shoulders jutted sharp like dry twigs, a threadbare garment draped over him, its patches frayed like rotting leaves. His bare feet were cracked and dusty, caked with dry mud like parched earth in a drought. The beggar didn't hold out a hand or call to anyone. He only watched the passing crowd with darkened, deeply tired eyes. In them there was no pleading, only an exhausted silence, not loud, but enough to make someone halt. The cold of the stone beneath him seemed to drain all warmth, and his gaunt body trembled now and then, like a last season leaf clinging to its branch by a thread of hope. The old man stood still for a long time. The market's noise seemed to recede until all that remained was the soft chiming of wind bells somewhere above. He lowered his gaze to his own feet. The new sandals, still perfectly curved, the soft leather glowing with a warm brown, a complete contrast to the beggar's cracked bare feet. Then he lifted his head, his eyes kind, deep, and calm, like a still lake. Without a word, he slowly bent down. His hands trembled with age, yet remained very gentle as he unfastened the straps and slipped the sandals from his thin feet. Carefully, he set them down in front of the beggar, his movements slow and reverent, as if placing something precious on the cold stone. The beggar looked up, his eyes disbelieving. The weathered face trembled for a moment, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. In that instant, the whole world seemed to pause. No more hurried footsteps, no hawkers' cries, only a white-haired, slender old man standing barefoot on the cold stones, and the beggar's eyes brightening as if a small sunbeam had slipped through gray clouds. The old man smiled, a very slight smile, not radiant, but warm like the day's last light, just enough to ease the chill without dazzling anyone. Then he turned, pulled on his old thinned socks with fraying threads like little footprints of time. His cane tapped lightly against the stones. Tock-tock, a steady sound as he resumed walking, merging into the stream of people heading toward the market. No one turned to look. No one knew what he had just done, but one thing was certain. The beggar still sat there, stunned, his trembling feet slipping into the soft, dark brown leather sandals, the lingering warmth from the lining threading through the cracks in his skin, easing the bite of the cold stones. After so many days of silence and weariness, his eyes now glimmered as if wet. As for the old man, each barefoot step pressed into paving stones still warm from the sun, yet his face seemed brighter in the softening afternoon light. His thin but upright shadow stretched along the stone road, blending into the pale gold, a delicate yet steady streak of light, the light of a quiet compassion that needed no words and no name to be remembered. And amid the rushing crowd, he kept walking slowly, just as he had at the start, as if the world didn't need to compete, to be more, only to stop at the right moment, to notice a cold pair of feet, and to leave behind a pair of sandals. That story seems small, but each time it's recalled, something like a light breeze passes through the mind and leaves the heart suddenly still. In an age where people race to accumulate, to have more, to possess more, the image of an old man quietly removing his new sandals to give to a stranger seems like a paradox, but a beautiful one. It reminds us the true value of a life isn't in what we hold on to, but in what we're willing to give. Modern society constantly tells us to strive, succeed, and stockpile for a full life. But the idea of fullness is increasingly distorted. The more people have, the more they feel they lack. People measure each other by numbers, how much money, how many homes, how many luxuries, and forget something that should be obvious: possessions can never define the worth of a soul. That day, the old man didn't measure his wealth by the sandals on his feet. He measured it by his ability to lessen someone's suffering. For the beggar, those sandals were not just something to walk in. They were recognition that someone still saw him, that a hand could still reach out in a cold crowd. And sometimes that very feeling, I am still seen, is what keeps a person from collapsing. Researchers studying generosity have found something striking. When a person gives away possessions, especially to the poor, the medial prefrontal cortex linked to empathy and emotion, regulation shows strong activity. At the same time, the brain's reward center lights up, releasing dopamine and producing a deep sense of happiness. In other words, when we give, the brain doesn't register loss, it registers gain. That moment of open hands, instead of making us poorer, makes us richer on the inside. That's why some people with plenty still feel empty. They've learned to accumulate, but never to give. Meanwhile, those with little can make others feel warm, because they're willing to share the little they have. Wealth isn't the sum you can count. Wealth is the ability to leave people less cold for having crossed your path. Someone once asked, "How do I know I have enough to give?" In truth, wealth isn't having much. It's knowing what's enough. Knowing you don't need to clutch more to feel safe, don't need to stockpile more to feel worthy. The feeling of enough doesn't come from material quantity, but from a mind that knows how to stop. Modern people live as if always lacking money, time, opportunity, recognition. So they keep piling on more, but the more they pile, the more they fear losing it. The old man understood that enough isn't having everything. Enough is being able to smile while sharing what you have. He didn't fear losing the sandals because he knew the worth of his life wasn't under his feet. It was in how he treated those in hardship. Psychologists have also shown that people who regularly do good deeds, even small ones like giving to someone in need, have lower stress and stronger immune systems than those who keep only for themselves. Giving isn't just moral action, it's a kind of healing. When our hands open, our heart opens. And when the heart opens, anxiety has less to cling to. That's why after helping someone, people often feel lighter, as if an invisible stone inside had been set down. Because in truth, when we clutch too much, we don't just hold possessions, we hold on to the fear of losing them. And that fear eats away at peace, faster than anything. That day, the old man didn't only leave behind a pair of sandals, he left behind the invisible burden of ownership. The moment he walked on in his thin socks over cold stone, his steps were light, not because the sandals were gone, but because his heart was less heavy. The world teaches us to accumulate for safety, but few teach that true safety isn't in what we keep, but in a mind unafraid of loss. One who hugs a vault of gold may still sleep in unease. One who can give away a coat sleeps soundly with empty hands. As the Buddha taught, he who gives a single garment is lighter than he who keeps a vault of gold. Have you ever thought that if each person gave up a small thing, no one would have to walk barefoot on cold streets? You don't need riches to do good. You only need a heart warm enough. The old man did nothing grand. He simply set down a pair of sandals. But for that beggar, he set down a piece of light. And that light, however small, was enough to push back the darkness in a person who seemed forgotten. Giving doesn't make us poor. It makes us unburdened. Because only when we're not bound by things are we truly free. And only then do we know we are living, not merely possessing. Late in the afternoon, the sky seemed to be holding its breath. The sun slipped behind the distant violet mountains, leaving a thin band of red-orange stretched across the forest crest, like a fading smear of lipstick on the lips of a day about to end. Wind blew down from the mountainside, threading through layers of ancient canopies, creating a vast, rustling sound like the whisper of time quietly passing. Deep in the old forest, in a clearing carpeted with brittle yellow leaves, an elderly monk was meditating. He sat there with his back straight, like an old trunk, hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes half closed. His body was still as stone, his breath as light as a wisp of smoke dissolving into the air, almost merging with the thickening forest shadows. The space around him was so quiet, you could hear a dry leaf fall. The insects' faint chirring in the distance gradually faded too, as if the whole forest were bowing to his silence. Then, from a rustling thicket, There was a slight movement at first, like a dark shape gliding by, then resolving into the form of a tiger. Under the sunset, its dark gold coat with black stripes looked even deeper. Its eyes gleamed a blood-tinged red from hunger belly hollowed, so the skin stretched tight over its ribs. It moved in slow, heavy steps, claws sliding out to rake the ground with a cold, sharp sound. Dry leaves snapped crisp beneath its feet, tiny cracks that rang out clearly in the absolute stillness. Its breathing hissed like wind whistling through a rock crevice. Each breath streamed hot and dense, pooling in the thin, cold mist of late day. Lowering its body, it moved in an arc like a hunter's eyes, locked on the small figure sitting motionless in the open. Only a few steps remained, close enough that a single pounce could tear the body before it. But the monk remained still. Not a muscle trembled, not a breath hastened, no fleeing, no cringing, no fear. He slowly opened his eyes. They were clear as a placid lake, reflecting the dying light of dusk without a ripple. In them, there was no fear and no challenge, only a pure presence, gentle and compassionate, as if that gaze had not come to confront, but to embrace the whole forest. The tiger halted. Its 4 legs felt pinned to the earth. The blood-red gaze wavered. The growl in its throat weakened like a flame guttering out for lack of anything left to burn. Wind drifted down the slope, lifting dry leaves from the ground, spinning them in the air, then letting them fall like thin letters. The tiger stood still, staring into the monk's eyes for a long time. Its breathing slowed, chest rising and falling more lightly. Then, in an unexpected instant, it turned. No roar, no lunge. It simply turned its back and walked away. Its dark gold and black coat blended into the deepening colors of the forest as dusk went out. Its shadow stretched across the ground and then vanished entirely into the dark woods as if it had never been there. The monk still sat. No backward glance, no sigh of relief. He gently closed his eyes again, returning to a steady breath, quiet as an underground stream running through stone. The forest wind rustled again, like someone laughing very softly, and the old forest sank back into silence, as if what had just happened had not happened at all. That story sounds like a legend, but in fact it lays bare a profound truth. Modern people often forget a peaceful mind can transform even danger. In a world that exalts physical strength, cutting-edge technology, layers of protection, and security barriers, we often mistake external things as our only safety. But the monk in that forest carried no weapon built, no barricade, had nothing but fearlessness, and it was precisely that which made the tiger a predator, driven by the instinct to attack stop. That peace is not some vague notion. Modern science has shown that the human body can broadcast signals of fear like an invisible beacon. When afraid, the sympathetic nervous system triggers the fight or flight response, heart-pounding blood pressure, rise in muscles, tightening eyes, darting cold sweat, breaking out. These signals don't just make people sense each other's unease. Animals can pick them up too. Behavioral biologists have observed that even predators like tigers, lions, and wolves become more aggressive and attack more fiercely when facing prey in panic. Conversely, if the prey stands still, no trembling, no signals of fear, their urge to attack diminishes markedly, even ceases. This means that calm itself can neutralize conflict. The monk did not oppose the tiger with force. He dissolved its ferocity with his own stillness. Some may ask, How can you stay calm when facing real danger? But calmness isn't the absence of fear. It's refusing to let fear dictate your actions. The monk surely knew that one pounce could tear him apart in an instant. Yet he chose not to let his mind be pulled into panic. Because he understood fear won't save your life. Fear makes you lose yourself before you lose your life. Neuroscientists have studied long-term meditators. Measuring brain waves under stress, they found the amygdala. The fear center was minimally active, while the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and decision-making, was highly active. In other words, sustained meditation trains the brain not to be dominated by fear, allowing clarity in danger. That is not knowing fear, but knowing fear without letting it rule. Anyone who has panicked knows how quickly fear makes a situation worse. The more you fear drowning, the more you thrash and the faster you sink. The more you fear losing control, the quicker you make rash choices and compound the chaos. Fear often increases risk. Calm is the one thing that can save us. So the key isn't eliminating danger, but keeping the mind from being swept into it. That is exactly what the monk in the forest did. He didn't defeat the tiger. He let the aggression in it fade in the presence of his own serenity. The Buddha taught fire cannot burn in water, and hatred cannot endure in a compassionate heart. The tiger came with hunger survival instinct. The monk came with loving kindness awakened nature, and compassion always softens conflict. Compassion is not weakness. It is the strength that leaves violence with no reason to exist. The modern world may lack hunting tigers, but it teems with hungry tigers in other forms. People growling from hunger for love, recognition, power, success. If we answer with fear or anger, we only pour fuel on the fire. If we keep our minds calm, we become like a lake when someone throws in a stone. The ripples rise and then settle by themselves, and that very stillness makes the thrower stop. The more hot-tempered a person is, the more they provoke strong pushback. The composed person cools conflict quickly, not by accident. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, states of feeling spread like waves. When one person is calm, the nervous systems of those around them ease. 2 heart rates, drop voices, soften behavior, becomes less violent. Peace works like an invisible field enveloping the space around them. The monk in the forest spoke no words and made no gesture, yet his calm mind made the tiger stop. That wasn't magic. It was the natural power of stillness, a rare strength modern people are losing. We live amid conflicts that lack claws, yet cut like knives. Icy criticism, contemptuous looks, simmering rivalries. We start to believe that to survive, we must win. But in truth, when you no longer need to win, you no longer compel the other side to fight. Without a fight, there is no one to lose. The monk didn't overcome the tiger with strength. He prevailed by not needing to prevail. And precisely because he didn't need to win, he created no defeat for anyone. This world is not short of strong people. What it needs more are peaceful ones, because only the peaceful do not add to violence. That day, the monk preached. No sermon gave no discourse, entered no debate. He simply sat still. And in that stillness, a fierce tiger turned away. Sometimes the strongest way to change the world is to sit quietly within it with a heart unafraid. That afternoon, the rain fell in fine needle-like drops, thin and cold, crisscrossing the silvery gray sky. The whole temple, tucked deep in the damp valley, seemed to sink into a light sleep. The long corridor of dark wood let out low, creaking notes whenever the mountain wind passed through, carrying the smell of wet earth and a faint hint of incense. Raindrops pooled on the lotus leaves in the courtyard, trembling with each gust glittering like tiny pearls that had fallen from another world. Beneath the old Bodhi tree, right by the temple gate where the ground was wet and clotted into dark streaks, a small dog lay curled up. It was so skinny it looked like skin wrapped over bone. Its fur, once perhaps a pale yellow, had turned into a dark, muddy layer caked on each soaked strand. One of its back legs was terribly swollen and inflamed, split open in a deep gash, flesh showing like a crack in a rotting trunk. Each time it tried to lift its head, its whole body shook like a dry leaf. Its breathing was labored and rapid, each breath as if it might shatter. Its eyes were clouded, yet in that gaze there still flickered a fear mixed with despair, like ashes holding a few embers. Rain fell on the bleeding wound, washing into smeared red streaks that ran down onto the ground. Each time the cold drops touched it, the dog let out a faint hiss, then collapsed again, panting as if each breath were a battle. Just then, from the far end of the meditation hall corridor, a young monk approached. His dark brown robe was slightly darkened with damp, and he still held the bamboo broom he had used to sweep the courtyard. When his eyes met the sight of the small, sodden animal lying motionless in the rain, he stopped. The world seemed to quiet for a moment. Only the patter of rain on the tiled roof and the broken breathing of that tiny creature remained. He walked over unhurriedly, then slowly sat down a few steps away. He didn't reach out right away, didn't say much. He just called softly, a sound as light as wind passing by. The dog raised its head a little, then lowered it, growling weakly. Its eyes widened, pupils shrinking to tiny black dots in the cloudy whites full of vigilance. He didn't come closer, and he didn't leave. He simply sat there like a gentle stone in the rain, letting the rain fall on his shoulders, and hair letting the frightened animal know you can be at ease. No one will hurt you anymore. Time passed as slowly as the raindrops collecting on the lotus leaves. The dog gradually stopped growling. Its breath was still fast, but no longer frantic. Only then did he slowly open the cloth pouch at his side and take out a neatly folded dry towel and a small bowl of water. He set them gently in front of it, then stood up and stepped back without a sound. No forcing. No coming any nearer. He only bowed his head lightly, then turned and walked slowly back into the temple. By the next afternoon, the rain had ceased. Pale strands of sunlight lay like fine silk over the still wet stone courtyard. The dog still lay under the Bodhi tree. Its fur was still matted with mud, its hind legs still swollen, but there was something different in those cloudy eyes. Less despair, a little more caution. When the young monk brought out some soft rice this time, it didn't growl. It only stared for a long while, then carefully bent to eat tiny bites, chewing very slowly, as if not yet believing this wasn't a trap. He didn't stand there watching for long. He simply left the food and went so it wouldn't feel cornered. The next day, and the day after that, every morning and every evening, someone from the temple brought out a little something, some rice, a piece of dry cloth, a bowl of clean water. No one said much. No one tried to get close. They just left the small offering and quietly went on like breezes passing without asking for anything. Gradually, the dog began to allow them nearer. One day, an elderly monk brought a warm towel and gently wiped the caked mud from its body. At first, it flinched, but those old hands were very slow, very tender, as if touching a fragile dream that could shatter at any moment. Another day, a young novice sat beside it, doing nothing, just sitting quietly eating his own portion of rice and leaving half for the dog. The dog watched him for a long time, then came over and ate with him small bite by small bite, then lay down beside him like a child exhausted after a long day of fear. No one called it a stray. No one asked where it came from. No one required it to be good to be grateful to prove it deserved this. They simply cared for it quietly, like tending a broken branch trying to come back to life. The wound on its leg was washed clean each day with fragrant medicine. Each drop falling into the red flesh made it shudder, but the hand gently stroking beside it helped it stay calm. In the early days, it still startled easily, sometimes growling in fear when anyone approached. But through steady patience and wordless gentleness, the monks helped it slowly remember that humans are not always a threat. A few weeks later, one morning the temple bell for early practice rang clear in the pristine air after a night of rain. As the first rays of sun pierced the thin clouds and shone on the still wet brick courtyard, the little dog stood up. It took one step, its leg trembling slightly, then another. New fur had begun to grow in smooth and shiny, glowing golden in the early light. Those once clouded eyes were now clear as young amber, bright with a gentle curiosity. It walked around the yard step by step, sniffing each corner of brick and each bush. Then at last, when the temple bell sounded long from the main hall, it ran toward it, tail faintly wagging, and sat at the steps, gazing into the quiet inside, as if listening for something deeper than sound. From a creature abandoned in the rain, it had become part of this place, a small but lively life, like a fresh leaf sprouting after a storm. And in the still courtyard, as the Bodhi leaves stirred softly in the light breeze, someone might catch a glimpse of a little dog lying by the steps, eyes half closed, ears slightly folded, body rounded, breathing evenly and peacefully as if it had belonged here all along. The story seems small, but it reflects a great truth. Modern people are forgetting compassion does not distinguish by species. In a world cut by countless invisible borders, we grow up with labels human and animal, close and distant, noble and lowly, deserving and undeserving. Little by little, human compassion gets squeezed into narrow priority circles, opened only to family acquaintances or those we deem worthy. But true compassion has never had conditions. Compassion doesn't ask who a being is, doesn't need to know origin, value, or role in the world. Compassion only asks, is it in pain? And it's striking that when we see a small creature in pain, the heart softens almost by reflex. Many mistake that for a fleeting sentimentality, a moment of weakness. But science has shown the opposite. Neuroscientists have found that when humans witness a vulnerable creature in pain, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula activate precisely the regions tied directly to empathy. In other words, the brain doesn't distinguish species, it responds to suffering. This means compassion isn't something taught like a moral subject. It's an inborn instinct present in us before we can speak or name anything at all. Yet as we grow up in a society that prizes efficiency, we are gradually trained to ignore small pains. We're coached to care about what yields profit, what brings achievement, while beings that offer no concrete benefit get pushed into the gray zone of indifference. But small does not mean meaningless. That little dog lying at the temple gate brings no material gain, contributes to no great accomplishment, yet it still deserves to live and to be loved. People often justify themselves. We haven't even taken care of people, why bother with animals? It sounds reasonable, but in truth, those who love animals are the ones who can fully love people. Real love doesn't select its targets. It's either open or closed. A heart that is closed to a small life will easily close to a larger one. Conversely, a heart that softens at an animal's pain cannot stay unmoved by a person's tears. Psychologists have shown that children raised in families that love and care for animals tend to have higher empathy, less violent behavior, and better social skills. That means when we practice loving what is smallest, we are quietly training ourselves to love what is larger. The people in the temple weren't just healing a dog, they were quietly keeping their own hearts from going numb. Because compassion, like a muscle, if not used regularly, will atrophy. And when compassion withers, the world around us starts to lose flavor. Everything seems bland. Even what once made us happy no longer stirs the heart. That's a sign compassion is drying up. The only way to revive it isn't grand humanitarian projects or sweeping declarations. It's to start loving again, even if it's just a small creature trembling at your gate. Some people who've lived long in coldness one day suddenly stop when they see a fallen fledgling, a hungry kitten, a soaked dog curled in the rain. And when they bend down to lift it, they cry. Not because that creature is special, but because they realize their heart can still feel. That is the moment compassion rises like water soaking into cracked earth. I still remember the Buddha's words, "Every life is precious, big or small, for all tremble alike before pain." A dog shaken from pain is no different than a person trembling from loss. The same survival reflex, the same quiet plea of life. Please don't abandon me. The monks weren't just saving a dog, they were whispering to life itself, "You deserve to stay." And sometimes if someone says that to you, even a small creature can stand up and go on. If each of us would pause a moment to care for something small, how much gentler this world would be. We don't have to save a whole species, only refuse to turn away from the pain right before us. Small does not mean meaningless. That dog didn't change the whole world, but it helped a group of people keep their compassion. And that compassion spreads quietly like incense in the main hall, seeping into every hush, softening hearts that have lived too long in drought. It's precisely such small things that keep our humanity intact. Not grand plans, not loud proclamations, but gentle hands setting down a bowl of water for a creature trembling in fear. In the end, compassion doesn't lie in great deeds. It lies in how we treat the smallest forms of life, beings that bring nothing but their existence, yet can awaken the human part of us that has fallen asleep. And as long as that humanity remains, there's still hope for this world. That night, the temple lay still in the valley, like a forgotten speck of time. A young moon hung in the sky, like a thin slice of silver, its pale light spilling over the moss-covered roofs and laying a cool, watery sheen across the mottled brick courtyard. The broad crowns of old Bodhi trees spread wide, casting deep black shadows on the damp ground, their leaves trembling whenever the night wind slipped through. Crickets rasped somewhere in the garden, mingling with the soft hiss of wind along the old wooden corridor, setting the small wind chime under the eaves to ring clear, glassy notes that shattered into the air and faded, leaving a dense, soaking quiet. In a small room at the end of the corridor, an elderly monk sat reading sutras. A flickering oil lamp beside him threw a pale yellow light, casting his shadow on the wooden wall, like a quiet stroke of ink, long and fragile. Each time he turned a page, the faint sound rose like a brush of wind and dissolved into the peaceful night. Then suddenly, a tiny sound came from the back door. Just a faint click of metal so soft it could have been the night wind touching the latch. But it wasn't. The darkness at the back door stirred. A scrawny, soot-dark figure slipped inside, furtive and thin. He moved step by light step like a cat, bare feet caked with mud leaving faint prints on the cold brick. His eyes darted about. His breath came fast. Every muscle was drawn tight like a string about to snap. He went to the row of wooden cabinets along the wall and, trembling, opened them one by one. Inside wasn't much, a few donation coins stacked in a bronze bowl, a dark wooden mala polished by years of use, and several rare fragrant candles brought by distant devotees. He stuffed each item into a frayed cloth bag in frantic haste, hands shaking as if afraid the things would vanish if he didn't snatch them quickly enough. His eyes were both greedy and afraid of being caught, afraid of punishment, but also afraid that if he got nothing tomorrow, he would be hungry again, back to drifting around the market and sleeping in rat-filled alleys. Behind him, the monk remained seated. No sound, not even a glance. His fingers continued to roll the beads. His lips softly intoned each word of the sutra, steady as breathing. When the bag was heavy, the thief looked up panting into the silence. He glanced toward the door, his eyes flashing with a mix of triumph and dread, then stepped back, ready to slip out. And then a warm, low voice rang out, shattering the stillness like a bell in the night. "It's cold tonight. Be careful you don't catch a chill." The thief jolted. The bag slipped from his hand and hit the brick with a dull clack. Coins rolled and chimed across the floor like raindrops on roof tiles. The old monk still sat where he was, back straight as an ancient pine. Lamplight fell across his face, wrinkles etched deep like the little roads of time. Yet his eyes were strangely clear, like a still lake without a ripple. No anger, no reproach, only a calm so complete it seemed to deepen the night itself. The thief froze. Cold sweat spread down his back. His hands trembled violently. No one had ever spoken to him so gently, least of all while he was doing something wrong. The monk looked at him, his voice even as the wind chime on the eaves. "If you need it, take it. But take care of your health. I wish you peace. No threats. No motion to summon anyone. Just a blessing as calmly as if he were seeing off a passing guest." The thief gaped, eyes wide, dry lips working. Why don't you report me?" The monk smiled, a kind smile like the young moon outside, slender, soft, and warm. "Because I don't want to keep fear and hatred in my heart. I hope you soon find a path where you won't need to take from anyone." Then he slowly bowed his head and pressed his palms together. For a moment, the whole room seemed to fall still. Night rain drummed on the tiles. Wind whispered through the cracks. The thief's ragged breathing, all of it was drawn into a silent space the monk had opened. The thief began to shake, not from cold, but from something strange, a quiet warmth spreading from his left chest where for so long there had only been hunger, fear beatings, and scornful looks. He bent down, picked up the cloth bag, yet put nothing more inside. Instead, he set each coin, each bead, each candle back into the cabinet as gently as if afraid of hurting them. Then he turned, said nothing, and ran into the night. His figure dwindled across the moon-washed courtyard and vanished behind the dark line of Bodhi trees. The monk stayed seated, eyes resting on the door as it clicked shut. He sighed softly, like wind gliding over a lake. He stooped to pick up the forgotten cloth bag, folded it neatly on the shelf, extinguished the lamp, and slowly returned to his mat. The beads resumed their steady sound, mingling with the bright ring of the wind chime outside. That night, the moon still hung like a thin slice of silver at the zenith. Only one thing was different. In that seemingly unchanged darkness, someone had left with a heart not entirely dark anymore. To many who hear it, this story may sound naive, unrealistic in our times, but in truth it clearly shows a deep fact. Forgiveness isn't to save someone else first. It frees yourself. In the modern world, we're taught to be strong, to never let anyone hurt us without paying. We're used to answering hurt with payback. Insulted, snap back. Betrayed, make them hurt as we did. Robbed, take it back at any cost. We call it justice, getting back what's ours. But most getting back doesn't restore what was lost. It only binds us to the same loop of resentment as the one who hurt us. And in that fire circle, no one wins, only hearts burned slowly into ash. The monk didn't call the authorities because he was weak or afraid. He did it because he understood something few dare to face. Holding a thief in your hands is less dangerous than holding hatred in your heart. For him, forgiveness wasn't ignoring wrongdoing. It was refusing to let that wrong keep imprisoning his mind. Neuroscientists have studied how forgiveness affects the brain. They've found that when people truly forgive, activity drops in the amygdala, the center for fear, anger, and fight or flight, while the prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason, emotional regulation, and higher decision-making, lights up. Put simply, forgiveness reduces stress responses and boosts self-regulation, turning crashing emotional waves into a calm surface so we can see what truly matters. No wonder those who forgive tend to have less anxiety, less depression, fewer sleepless nights, and better overall health. Forgiveness heals not only the heart, it also saves the body. Left to smolder, anger becomes a toxin. It speeds the heart, raises blood pressure, weakens immunity, and floods the bloodstream with stress hormones. Forgiveness, by contrast, is like removing a stone from your chest so it can beat lightly and free again. Have you noticed cling to anger long enough and you're the first to be exhausted? You don't sleep well, you don't eat well. Every day feels like dragging a heavy sack behind you. Meanwhile, the one who hurt you may have forgotten long ago. Yet you relive it daily like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. The monk didn't choose that. He chose to stop the chain of suffering with himself. People ask, but if we don't punish, won't the thief keep doing wrong? It sounds reasonable, but overlooks a truth. Punishment doesn't always make people better. Compassion does. It's the only thing that can end cycles of retribution. People rarely change because they're beaten down. They change when, for the first time, someone looks at them without judgment. Psychologists call this the unexpected kindness effect. When someone shunned or mistreated suddenly receives unconditional kindness, the brain releases oxytocin and dopamine hormones of bonding, safety, and happiness, while defensive circuits quiet down. Kindness doesn't make them weaker. It lets them feel safe enough to lower their armor. In that moment, real change has a chance to sprout. Forgiveness then transforms more strongly than punishment. The monk knew this. He wasn't guarding possessions, he was guarding a chance for a lost heart to find its way back. Instead of slamming shut the one open door, he kept it cracked with a simple blessing of peace. Think about it. If everyone avenged their hurts, and the other side avenged back and so on, where would the cycle stop? No one wins a war with no end point. Only hearts harden with each round of payback. To end a ring of fire, you can't throw on more wood, you have to drop the match in your hand. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting condoning or letting harm continue. It means not letting that wound run your life. It means you can look back at the old hurt without shaking, without hatred, only with the calm you feel toward a rainstorm that is past. The Buddha taught hatred is never ended by hatred. Only love ends hatred. The monk refused to be pulled into hatred. He chose to stop, and in that moment he won, not over the thief, but over the anger in himself. Today's world is not short on laws, but it is short on forgiveness. Law can curb behavior. Only forgiveness heals the heart. And when the heart heals, wrongdoing loses soil to grow in. Have you ever been forgiven? That weightless feeling, like the chains coming off your chest, like being allowed to begin again. Forgiveness is a gift, not only for the other, but for yourself. It returns you to the present, instead of locking you in the past. That night, the monk didn't keep the bag, didn't detain the thief, didn't preach a long sermon. He simply said, "I wish you peace." And that blessing dissolved the wall between two people, one taken, one being taken from. Sometimes a blessing of peace can change more than a sentence ever could. A sentence makes a head bow out of fear, but compassion makes a head bow out of shame. And that shame is where transformation begins. Forgiveness is not weakness. Forgiveness is the courage to choose healing over revenge. Revenge is an animal reflex. Forgiveness is an act of wisdom. And only when we live by wisdom will this world stop overflowing with hate. That morning dawn arrived very slowly, as if the sky itself wanted to step softly, so it wouldn't wake the temple garden, still dozing in the night's sleep. A thin veil of mist hung like gauze, embracing each branch, each moss-covered stone, each small pebble scattered along the brick path. The air was cool, scented faintly with damp earth and the fragrance of newly sprouted wild grass. Birds were still sparse, just a few small clicks in the canopy, as if they too were cautious before the absolute quiet of this place. Within that space, a small lotus pond tucked behind the garden lay with a surface smooth as an ancient mirror. On the water, tiny beads of dew clung to the round lotus leaves, spread out like jade plates, shimmering in the pale pink light of dawn, slowly pouring in from the horizon. Each time a light breeze passed, the pond rippled with delicate rings, faint as the water's whisper, then vanished so quickly you doubted they had been there at all. And by the bank, in the midst of that gentle scene, a child sat cross-legged. He was very small, 6 or 7 at most, hair neatly cropped, a round, chubby face, skin a light rosy peach. Bare feet rested neatly on grass, still wet with dew, hands folded on his knees, a light brown robe slightly wrinkled at the elbows, but clean and sun-fresh. In front of him was a lotus just beginning to open. It rose from the still water like a slow miracle, graceful and silent. Pale pink petals, thin as silk, were gradually separating, trembling in the faint breeze like fragile butterflies just freed from their cocoons. At the center, fresh yellow stamens like dustings of sunlight caught from yesterday were slowly revealing themselves as each layer opened. The child said nothing. No gasp of wonder, no delighted cry, no hand reaching out. He simply sat, eyes wide, black and clear as the pond's surface, watching, as if the world contained only one thing worth looking at: the lotus blooming. Time passed, though no one could say how long. The sky blushed, the soft early light shifting to pale gold, then warmer, deeper. The mist lifted in patches like a thin scarf tugged away by the breeze, revealing ancient trees standing still in the distance. Birds grew livelier, voices ringing from the leaves, trailing out like ribbons of sound strewn across the delicate air. But the child remained still, like a small stone beside the water, as if he too were part of the garden long present here, only unnoticed until now. When the sun rose higher, a first ray dropped onto the water, gold pouring through air, still holding a little chill. Dew on the lotus leaves suddenly flashed, sparkling like melting crystals. Just then, the lotus before him opened fully. Pale pink petals reached outward, smooth and luminous like freshly woven silk. The golden center quivered, welcoming the first drops of sun. A faint fragrance spread into the air, pure and delicate, so fine you feared it might disappear if you breathed too hard. And the child still sat quietly. No hurry, no impulse to pluck the lotus, no urge to understand or analyze what was happening. Just looking, simply looking. His dark eyes didn't blink, calm as a deep pool reflecting the blooming flower without stirring even a shadow of desire. No eagerness, no demand, not the slightest thought of possessing what he saw. A child's world is usually an endless string of curiosities wanting to know, to touch, to peel, to taste, to explore. But now it was as if he had let all that go. He didn't need to know where this lotus came from, why it bloomed, or when it would fade. He only needed to witness it bloom. And by sitting there, receiving, without taking, loving, without touching, he was doing what not many adults can, letting beauty exist in full, unclaimed by our hands or our names. At last, the sun cleared the ridgelight, pouring over the garden, making the lotus leaves shine a clear green. The birds were chattering on the branches. From the main hall, the bell sounded deep and warm, each peal dissolving into the clear air. And the child sat just the same. In that moment, the garden seemed to hold its breath. The whole world seemed reduced to two things: a lotus in bloom, and a gaze asking for nothing more than to quietly witness it. No one knew who the child was, where he came from, or where he would go after he stood up. Only this was known: that morning a lotus opened, and an attentive gaze was wholly present with it. No claiming, no analysis, no touching, no haste. And perhaps that is the purest presence a living being can offer the beauty of this world. That seemingly small story holds a lesson almost all adults lose along the road to growing up knowing how to stop and look deeply. Modern life trains us to live like machines that never stop running. Each morning, the first reflex is to reach for the phone to check messages, calendars, the endless notifications pricking the just-woken mind. A hurried breakfast, then into the stream of traffic people plans. Lunch eaten while the mind loops unfinished meetings. Evening at home, supposedly rest, yet the scroll continues page after page, as if afraid to miss something, though none of it truly matters. We've grown so used to going that we've forgotten how to stop. Forgotten the feeling of simply sitting by a window and watching sunlight slip across the sill. Forgotten the small happiness of listening to a song without doing anything else. Forgotten how to look at a single flower, truly look without rushing to name it, classify it, snap it, post it, and turn it into a data point to process. We think we're living, but we're only skimming, like we skim screens. Hurried shallow, always ready to skip to the more important thing. The child by the lotus pond was not like that. He didn't need to understand, analyze, or seize. He didn't look at the lotus to know its species didn't count its petals, didn't wonder when it would fade. He simply sat wholly present for a flower opening. And that perfect presence, untainted by the past, unburdened by the future, is what nearly all adults have lost. Neuroscientists have studied the state called mindfulness, when the mind attends wholly to the present without judging. They found that in this state, the prefrontal cortex responsible for focus, self-regulation, and decision-making becomes more active, while the default mode network, which spins out mind-wandering rumination and worry, falls quiet. In other words, simply by attending to one small thing, the mind can soothe itself. So, when the child watched the lotus, he wasn't just looking at a flower, he was letting his mind rest. Have you tried it? Just sit and look at one thing. No judging. No planning what's next. No trying to use it to make yourself better. At first, you may feel restless. Your brain is used to being tugged nonstop. But after a few minutes, the mind settles like a windless pond, and the ripples you thought would never stop fade like thin smoke. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the absence of inner agitation. That child hadn't studied meditation, didn't know the term mindfulness needed no retreat or long ritual. Yet he was practicing what monks spend a lifetime returning to, being fully with the moment at hand. No fuss, no fixed schedule, just presence. One lotus, one breath, one ray of light through leaves. Things that seem small can open a universe of peace if you look deeply enough. Modern life has taught people to analyze, evaluate, and measure, but few are taught to simply see. So in the face of beauty, adults reflexively try to record it instead of living in it. We rush to photograph the flower, post it, and move on, never realizing we've never truly looked. But the child only sat still, and because of that, he saw what adults don't see anymore. The Buddha taught, when the mind is still, a single flower is the whole world. That lotus was no different from thousands of flowers that have bloomed and faded. But in the moment the child looked with complete attention, it became singular. Beauty's value doesn't lie in the thing itself, but in how present our mind is when we see it. Psychologists have found that when people concentrate fully on a simple activity, like observing nature, cortisol, the stress hormone drops significantly, while the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and restore system, ramps up. That means stopping to look deeply not only nourishes the soul, it heals the body. Ever wonder why children are often happier than adults? Not because they have more, because they look closer. They pause to watch an ant crawling a streak of light on a wall, a petal opening things adults no longer notice. So their joy is greater, even though they have less. The child by the lotus pond doesn't know success pressure or 5-year plans. He only knows a flower is blooming, and he doesn't want to miss it. That's what every adult needs to relearn to stop so we don't miss what's alive right in front of us. What if each day you gave just 5 minutes to true presence? 5 minutes with a flower. 5 minutes listening closely to the wind. 5 minutes breathing without doing anything else. Not to become a better person, but simply to become a person again. Only when the mind stops can we truly touch the life happening now. That child did nothing grand. He simply sat and watched a lotus. Yet, in that quiet gaze, he grasped what adults spend a lifetime seeking, beauty revealed in stillness. And perhaps, in that simple moment, a seed of mindfulness was planted enough that later, amid a noisy life, he will remember how to turn inward and sit quietly before a lotus in bloom. Each Zen story we've just passed about the monk carrying the sick, the mother sharing her meal, the child returning fish, seems like small fragments, yet they reflect what's deepest in each of us. In a society always pushing for faster, more victory after victory, these stories remind us there is another path. A path of slowing, to look deeply, of staying the hand, so we can share of letting go, so we can love of yielding, so we can protect the life around us. The Buddha taught no one loses by loving. They only lose the burden of the ego. That is what each figure in these stories chose, to put compassion first, to place another's life ahead of their own, and then to walk on gently, without needing their name to be known. You may not save the whole world, but you can always save someone with a gentle look and offered hand, or simply by sitting quietly beside their pain. The world doesn't change through loud noise. It changes through hearts willing to live kindly, quietly, day after day. If these Zen stories have planted a pocket of stillness in you, a bit of peace amid the clamor, I invite you to keep walking with the Buddhism Seeds channel, where each story is a small seed softly sprouting in your heart. Please subscribe, like, and share, and leave a comment below about what touched your heart most today, because your sincere words might be the small light that guides a wandering soul out there.